Looking back, Daniel Carter would have given away everything he owned for just one chance to speak up. Not when he lost his job. Not when he buried his father. Not even when he stood alone in the empty house that used to echo with laughter. No, if he could go back, he would return to one ordinary Sunday dinner. To one simple moment, when his wife looked at him with tears in her eyes, silently begging him to stand beside her, and he would say the words that came years too late. "She's my wife. You will respect her." But life doesn't let us rewrite the chapters we've already lived. Sometimes, the smallest decisions become the biggest regrets. Have you ever looked back and realized that one moment, one sentence, one choice, one silence changed the course of your entire life? If you have, then today's story will stay with you. Because this isn't just a love story. It's a story about the danger of staying quiet to keep everyone happy. It's about family, pride, loyalty, and the painful truth that people rarely leave after one mistake. They leave after 1,000 moments that made them feel alone. And perhaps the hardest lesson of all. By the time some people realize what they had, the person they loved has already learned how to live without them. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, do you believe a husband should always defend his wife, even if it means standing against his own family? Your answer might change by the end of this story. Looking back, Daniel Carter would one day realize that marriages rarely fall apart because of one terrible mistake. Most of the time, they break because of small moments that people convince themselves don't matter. A disrespectful joke, an ignored feeling, a promise postponed, a silence that should have been broken. At the time, Daniel thought he was protecting his family. Years later, he would understand that he had simply been too afraid to disappoint people. And fear has destroyed more relationships than anger ever could. Daniel grew up in a quiet neighborhood outside Columbus, Ohio. His father worked long hours, and his mother, Patricia Carter, believed that family loyalty came before everything else. In the Carter household, children were taught to respect their elders. Questioning your parents was considered disrespectful. Disagreeing with them was almost unthinkable. Daniel was a gentle child. He hated arguments. Whenever his older brothers fought, he walked away. Whenever tension filled the house, he stayed in his room. His mother often smiled and said, "You're the good one. You never cause trouble." Daniel loved hearing those words. Without realizing it, he built his entire personality around them. He became the man who never complained, the man who never argued, the man who believed that keeping quiet was the same thing as keeping peace. But there is an important lesson many people learn too late. Avoiding conflict does not solve problems. It only delays them. And delayed problems usually come back bigger than before. Maya Brooks was raised very differently. Her mother was a high school teacher who believed education was the key to freedom. She taught Maya to respect people, but she also taught her to respect herself. If someone hurts you, her mother always said, don't stay silent just because you love them. Those words stayed with Maya. She grew into a confident, compassionate woman and became a pediatric nurse. She spent her days comforting frightened children and encouraging worried parents. She believed that honest conversations could heal almost anything. When she met Daniel at a community charity event, she saw kindness in him. He listened carefully. He remembered little details. He opened doors for strangers. He had a quiet strength that made her feel safe. She didn't know that his silence was not always strength. Sometimes it was fear. Their love story was simple. They went to baseball games. They took road trips across small American towns. They spent Sunday afternoons cooking together, while old music played in the background. Daniel dreamed of building a family. Maya dreamed of building a home filled with laughter and respect. When he proposed, he looked into her eyes and said, "No matter what happens, we'll face life together." Maya believed him with all her heart. After their wedding, Daniel wanted to stay close to his family. Maya agreed. She knew family mattered. She wanted to become part of his. At first, everything seemed normal. Then, little comments started appearing. Patricia would smile and say, "You work such long hours. I hope you'll still have time to be a proper wife." Another day she would laugh and add, "My son always loved home-cooked meals. Fast food won't keep a marriage healthy." Maya tried not to take it personally. She smiled. She stayed polite. She told herself she was still new to the family. But every time, she looked at Daniel. Every time, he looked somewhere else. One evening, after a family barbecue, Maya sat quietly in the car. Daniel noticed. "Everything okay?" She waited a moment. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "If someone was disrespecting you, I'd stand up for you." Daniel nodded. "I know." She looked at him. "Would you do the same for me?" The question caught him off guard. "Of course I would." She spoke softly. "Even if it was your own family." Daniel didn't answer right away. He had spent his whole life trying not to upset anyone. The idea of confronting his mother made him uncomfortable. "I just don't want everyone fighting." Maya smiled sadly. "I don't want fighting either." She turned toward the window. I just don't want to fight alone. Her words stayed in the car long after the conversation ended. A few months later, Maya was recognized by the hospital for helping organize a children's cancer support program. It was one of the proudest moments of her life. Daniel was excited. He invited his family to dinner to celebrate. Maya thought maybe this would be a fresh start. Halfway through the meal, Patricia lifted her glass. "We're all proud of Maya." Everyone smiled. Then Patricia added, "I just hope she remembers that careers don't keep husbands happy. Families do." A few people laughed. Maya didn't. She looked at Daniel. He heard every word. He knew it was unfair. He knew his wife was hurting. He knew one simple sentence could stop it. But old habits are hard to break. He lowered his eyes and stayed silent. The conversation moved on. Maya's heart did not. On the drive home, neither of them spoke. The city lights passed across the windshield. Finally, Maya broke the silence. "Do you know what hurts the most?" Daniel tightened his hands around the steering wheel. "What?" "It's not what your mother says." He looked at her. "It's that every time she says it, I realize I'm standing there by myself." Daniel wanted to explain. He wanted to say he hated arguments. He wanted to say he was trying to keep everyone together. But excuses cannot heal wounds. And love cannot grow where one person always feels abandoned. The drive home felt longer than it really was. Daniel kept both hands on the steering wheel, staring at the road ahead. Maya sat beside him, watching the lights from passing cars disappear into the darkness. Neither of them spoke. Sometimes silence can feel peaceful. Other times, it feels like a wall that grows taller every minute. When they finally reached home, Maya took off her shoes and walked into the kitchen. Daniel followed her. "I know tonight wasn't easy," he said. She nodded without turning around. "I wish she hadn't said that." Maya slowly placed her purse on the counter. "But she did." Daniel sighed. "She doesn't always think before she speaks." Maya finally looked at him. "And you don't always speak when you should." The words hit him harder than he expected. "I don't like fighting." "I know. I just don't want to make things worse." A tired smile crossed her face. "Daniel, have you ever thought that maybe you're making them worse by pretending they don't exist?" He didn't answer, because somewhere deep inside, he was beginning to wonder if she was right. The next few weeks were calm. At least, they looked calm from the outside. Daniel went to work every morning. Maya continued her long shifts at the children's hospital. They still ate dinner together. They still watched movies on Friday nights. They still kissed each other goodbye. But something had changed. The conversations were shorter. The laughter came less often. And Maya stopped telling him about the small things that happened during her day. Daniel noticed. He simply didn't know how to fix it. Many people believe relationships end when people stop loving each other. Often, they begin to end when people stop talking. One Saturday morning, Maya was watering flowers on the front porch when their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Harrison, walked over. "You two doing all right?" she asked with a warm smile. Maya looked surprised. "Why do you ask?" "Oh," the older woman laughed softly. "I've been married 50 years. You learn to recognize quiet." Maya smiled politely. Mrs. Harrison pointed toward the flowers. "You know, plants die 2 ways." Maya looked down. "Too little water." The older woman paused. "Or too little sunlight." Then she smiled and walked away. Later that afternoon, Daniel's younger sister, Rebecca, called. "Mum's planning a family dinner next Sunday." Daniel hesitated. "We were actually thinking about staying home." Rebecca laughed. "You know Mom. She won't take no for an answer." Daniel promised he would talk to Maya. When he walked into the living room, she was reading a book. "My family wants us over next Sunday." She quietly closed the book. "I don't think I'm ready. It's only dinner." It never feels like only dinner. Daniel sat beside her. "They're still my family." She looked at him gently. "And I'm still your family too." He reached for her hand. "I just want everyone to get along." Maya squeezed his fingers. "So do I." Then she let go. But wanting something and doing something aren't always the same. A few days later, Daniel had lunch with his friend Marcus. The two had known each other since college. Marcus had a way of saying exactly what he thought. Daniel told him everything. The comments, the awkward dinners, the arguments with Maya. Marcus listened quietly. Then he asked one question. "If another man treated your wife the way your family does, what would you do?" Daniel answered immediately. "I'd tell him to stop." Marcus nodded. "So why is it different?" Daniel looked down at his coffee. "Because they're my family." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "So is Maya." The conversation stayed with Daniel for the rest of the day. But changing old habits is harder than recognizing them. Sunday arrived. Maya stood in front of the bedroom mirror. She wore a simple blue dress. Daniel noticed she wasn't smiling. "You don't have to go if you really don't want to." She looked at him. Do you want me to stay home? He hesitated. That tiny pause was all she needed. You want me there because it'll make your mother happy. That's not true, isn't it? Daniel didn't know. The truth was complicated. He wanted Maya there because he loved her. He wanted her there because he hated disappointing his family. And he wanted to believe that maybe this dinner would somehow be different. Hope can be a beautiful thing. Sometimes, it can also make people ignore what they already know. Patricia Carter's house was already full when they arrived. Relatives filled the living room. Children ran through the hallway. The smell of roasted chicken and fresh bread drifted from the kitchen. Patricia hugged Daniel. Then she turned to Maya. You made it. Maya smiled politely. I did. Patricia looked at her watch. I wasn't sure. Hospital people are always so busy. The comment was small, almost harmless. Daniel heard it. He told himself not to overthink it. Dinner began peacefully. People talked about sports, vacations, work. Rebecca showed pictures from a recent trip. For a moment, Maya relaxed. Then Daniel's uncle looked across the table. So, when are you two giving Patricia some grandchildren? Daniel laughed nervously. We're taking life one step at a time. His uncle smiled. Well, don't wait too long. Patricia shook her head. These career women like waiting. The room grew quiet. Maya placed her fork on the table. She looked at Daniel. He felt every eye in the room. His heart started racing. He knew what he should say. He knew what his friend Marcus would say. He knew what Maya needed. But the little boy who had spent his life avoiding conflict was still inside him. He cleared his throat. Then he reached for his glass of water. Someone changed the subject. Dinner continued. Maya barely touched her food. On the drive home, the silence returned. Daniel couldn't stand it. I know you're upset. She kept looking through the window. Are you? What does that mean? She turned toward him. Are you upset? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. She nodded. That's what I thought. When they reached home, Maya walked into the bedroom and quietly began folding clothes. Daniel frowned. What are you doing? I'm packing a small bag. His stomach tightened. Why? I need some time. His voice rose for the first time. You're leaving because of one dinner? She stopped folding. Then she looked at him with tears in her eyes. No, Daniel. Her voice was calm. I'm leaving because of every dinner. The room became painfully quiet. He wanted to tell her he would change. He wanted to promise that things would be different. But promises are easy. People trust patterns. And the pattern she had lived with was a husband who always chose silence. Maya zipped the bag shut. I'll stay with my mother for a little while. Daniel took one step toward her. When are you coming back? She held the bag tightly. I don't know. Then she walked past him. Daniel stood in the middle of the bedroom, listening to the front door open. Then close. He waited for a few seconds. He thought she might come back. He thought she might realize this was all a misunderstanding. But the house remained quiet. For the first time since they had married, Daniel understood something he had never allowed himself to believe. The people we love do not usually leave because they stop loving us. Sometimes they leave because they grow tired of feeling invisible. And standing alone in that empty house, Daniel had no idea that the choice he had made over and over again was about to change both of their lives forever. Daniel spent years believing that staying silent would keep his family together. Instead, it may have cost him the woman he loved most. But was Maya right to leave, or should she have given him one more chance? As we move into the next chapter, Daniel will be forced to face a painful question. Can a marriage survive when one person finally gets tired of waiting to be chosen? If this story has touched your heart so far, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, and share it with someone who believes that love should never have to fight alone. Because the hardest part of Daniel and Maya's journey is only beginning. And some regrets arrive long before forgiveness. The front door closed. Daniel stood in the middle of the living room, staring at it. His mind refused to accept what had just happened. Maya had left angry before. After a stressful week at work, she had once spent the night at her mother's house. Another time, after a disagreement about money, she had gone to visit a friend for the weekend. But she had always called. She had always come home. Daniel looked at the clock. 8:17 p.m. He took out his phone. His thumb hovered over her name. Then he smiled to himself. She just needs a little space. He put the phone back in his pocket. Tomorrow would be better. Tomorrow they would talk. Tomorrow, everything would return to normal. The next morning, Daniel woke up earlier than usual. For a few seconds, he forgot. Then he turned toward the other side of the bed. The pillow was untouched. The room was quiet. He got dressed and walked into the kitchen. Maya's coffee mug was still in the sink. Her favorite cereal sat on the counter. The blue jacket she wore on cold mornings was missing from the coat rack. Daniel poured himself a cup of coffee. It tasted bitter. He almost laughed. Maya always added a little cinnamon to the coffee. She said life was hard enough. Small things should make people smile. Daniel had always teased her about that. Now he found himself opening the cabinet and looking for the cinnamon. At work, he couldn't concentrate. His co-worker, Steve, looked across the office. "You all right?" Daniel nodded. "Didn't sleep much." Steve laughed. "Welcome to marriage." Daniel forced a smile. If only it were that simple. Around lunchtime, he finally sent Maya a message. "Hope you're okay. Call me when you're ready." He stared at the screen. No reply. He told himself she was busy. Hospitals were unpredictable. People got busy. Phones died. There were always explanations. That evening, Daniel stopped by the grocery store. Without thinking, he picked up Maya's favorite strawberry yogurt. Fresh fruit, the tea she liked. When he reached the checkout line, he looked at the shopping cart. Almost everything inside was for her. He quietly put the yogurt back. The house was dark when he got home. He unlocked the front door and waited. Some part of him expected her to be sitting on the couch, maybe reading, maybe watching television, maybe waiting for him. But the house was empty. He walked into the bedroom. Her side of the closet looked different. Not empty, just different. A few dresses were gone. Her travel bag was gone. The small jewelry box her grandmother had given her was gone too. Daniel frowned. She had packed more than he realized. His phone rang. It was his mother. "How are you doing?" Patricia asked. "I'm fine." "And Maya?" "She's staying with her mother for a few days." Patricia sighed. "I knew she'd calm down." Daniel didn't answer. His mother continued. "Honestly, Daniel, I think she overreacted." He looked around the quiet house. For some reason, those words bothered him, more than they ever had before. "I have to go, Mom. Tell Maya I said hello." Daniel ended the call. He didn't know why, but for the first time, saying hello on behalf of someone else felt dishonest. 3 days passed. Still no call. Still no message. Daniel kept expecting to hear her keys at the front door. He kept looking up every time a car stopped outside. On the 4th evening, he decided to drive to Angela Brooks's house. The entire trip, he rehearsed what he would say. "I'm sorry. Let's go home. We'll figure this out." He parked across the street. The porch light was on. Maya's car sat in the driveway. Daniel took a deep breath and walked toward the front door. Before he could knock, he heard laughter. He stopped. Maya was inside with her mother. She was laughing. It wasn't a loud laugh. It wasn't the kind she used to have with him, but it was real. Daniel suddenly realized something that made his chest ache. The world had not stopped because she left. She was learning how to live without him. He quietly turned around and walked back to his car. He told himself he was doing the right thing. He didn't want to pressure her. He didn't want to make a scene. He would wait a little longer. Waiting had always felt easier than confronting difficult things. He drove home, alone. The next Saturday, Daniel decided to clean the house. He wasn't sure why. Maybe he wanted to stay busy. Maybe he wanted Maya to come home to a clean place. He folded blankets, vacuumed the floors, organized the kitchen. Then he walked into the spare bedroom. A cardboard box sat in the corner. Maya had packed it weeks ago. She had said they should donate old clothes and books. Daniel had forgotten all about it. He opened the box. Inside were photo albums, old birthday cards, movie tickets, wedding souvenirs. He smiled as he picked up a framed picture from their honeymoon. Behind it was a white envelope. His name was written across the front. Daniel. His smile disappeared. His hands suddenly felt heavy. He didn't remember seeing the envelope before. Slowly, he opened it. Inside was a folded piece of paper. Just one page. At the top, in Maya's handwriting, were 6 words that made his heart stop. "I don't know how much longer I can do this." Daniel stared at the sentence. The date in the corner of the page was almost 8 months old. 8 months. She had been hurting for 8 months, and he had never even noticed. He slowly sat down on the floor. The letter trembled in his hands. Then he turned the page to read the rest. Daniel stared at the paper in his hands. His heart pounded so hard that he could hear it. The date was there in black ink. 8 months earlier. Long before Maya packed a bag. Long before she walked out of the house. Long before that last family dinner. He slowly unfolded the page. The first line was simple. "Daniel, I don't know if I'll ever give this to you." He swallowed. Then he kept reading. "I know you love me. I have never doubted that. What I doubt is whether you see what is happening to us. Every time I leave your parents' house, I tell myself things will get better. Every time I ask you to stand beside me, you promise you will. And every time I walk into the next family gathering, hoping this will finally be the day you choose us. Then I look over at you, and you look away." Daniel stopped reading. His eyes filled with tears. He remembered every dinner, every uncomfortable joke, every silent drive home. He had convinced himself those moments were small. To Maya, they had become memories she could not escape. He forced himself to continue. "I don't want you to fight with your family. I don't want you to hate anyone. I just want to know that when life becomes difficult, I won't have to face it alone. You always tell me that you don't like conflict. But your silence doesn't end conflict. It simply tells me that my feelings come second. Daniel lowered the letter. He covered his face with both hands. The house was quiet. Too quiet. For the first time, he wondered how many nights Maya had cried after he had fallen asleep. How many times she had smiled in front of other people and broken down when nobody was watching. He stood up and walked through the house. The kitchen, the living room, the back porch, every room carried a memory. There was the chair where Maya used to read on Sunday mornings, the window where she kept small flower pots, the refrigerator covered with pictures from road trips and holidays. Daniel reached for one photograph. It was taken at a county fair. Maya was laughing while holding a giant stuffed bear he had won for her. He remembered that day clearly. She had looked at him and said, "You know what I love about you?" He had smiled. "What?" "You make me feel safe." Daniel slowly put the picture back. He no longer knew if that had ever been true. That evening, Marcus came over. The moment he saw Daniel's face, he knew something was wrong. "What happened?" Daniel handed him the letter. Marcus quietly read it. When he finished, he placed it on the table. "Did you know she felt this way?" Daniel shook his head. "No." Marcus looked at him. "Or did you just not want to know?" The question hurt, because deep inside, Daniel wasn't sure. There had been signs, conversations, tears, long drives home without a single word. He had seen them. He had simply believed there would always be another chance to fix everything. The next morning, Daniel drove to Maya's workplace. He sat in the parking lot for almost 20 minutes. Nurses and doctors walked in and out of the building. Finally, he saw her. She looked tired, but she also looked calm. She was carrying a folder against her chest and talking to another nurse. Daniel started to open the car door. Then he stopped. Maya laughed at something her co-worker said. It was a small laugh, but it reminded him of the night he had stood outside her mother's house. She was slowly building a life that did not depend on him. His hands tightened around the steering wheel. He wanted to run after her. He wanted to apologize. He wanted to tell her he had finally read the letter. Instead, he watched her walk inside the hospital. The doors closed behind her, and Daniel drove away. That afternoon, Rebecca knocked on his front door. "I was in the neighborhood," she said. Daniel let her in. She noticed the letter on the table. "You found it." Daniel looked surprised. "You knew about this?" Rebecca nodded. "Maya wrote it after Christmas." He frowned. "You knew she was hurting?" Rebecca looked down. "I thought you knew too." Daniel sat down slowly. Rebecca took a deep breath. There were times she cried in the bathroom after family dinners. Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. "What?" Rebecca nodded. "I found her once." He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" Rebecca looked at him sadly. "Maya said she didn't want people choosing sides." The words echoed through the room. She had spent years protecting the very family that had hurt her. Before leaving, Rebecca stopped at the front door. "I should probably tell you something else." Daniel looked up. "What?" "I had lunch with Maya yesterday." His heart started racing. "What did she say?" Rebecca hesitated. Then she answered quietly. "She asked me if I thought people could really change." Daniel stood up. "And what did you tell her?" Rebecca looked at her brother for a long moment. "I told her that people change when losing something hurts more than changing themselves." The front door closed. Daniel was alone again. That night, he couldn't sleep. He opened the letter once more. This time, he read the final paragraph. "I hope one day you understand that I was never asking you to choose between me and your family. I was asking you to remember that when you married me, we became a family too." Daniel folded the paper carefully. Then he walked into the bedroom. He opened the drawer beside the bed and took out his wedding ring. He had removed it a few days earlier because looking at it was painful. He slipped it back onto his finger. Then he picked up his phone. He scrolled until he found his mother's name. His thumb hovered over the call button. For 36 years, Daniel Carter had done everything he could to avoid difficult conversations. Tonight, he knew one was waiting for him. He took a deep breath, and just before he pressed the button, another call came through. The screen lit up. It was Angela Brooks, Maya's mother. Daniel answered immediately. "Angela, is Maya okay?" There was silence on the other end. Then Angela spoke. Her voice was calm, but it carried a fear Daniel had never heard before. "You need to come to the hospital." The call ended. Daniel grabbed his keys and ran for the front door. He had no idea what had happened. He only knew one thing. He was terrified that he was already too late. Daniel broke every speed limit on the way to the hospital. His hands were shaking so badly that he almost dropped his phone at a red light. Angela's words kept repeating in his mind. "You need to come to the hospital." She hadn't explained anything. She hadn't said Maya was hurt. She hadn't said she was sick. But she hadn't said she was all right either. And sometimes, what people don't say is the most frightening part. Rain began to fall as Daniel pulled into the emergency entrance. He jumped out of the car and hurried inside. The bright lights made everything feel unreal. Doctors walked quickly through the halls. Nurses pushed patients from one room to another. Families sat in waiting areas with worried faces. Daniel looked around until he saw Angela standing near a window. She looked exhausted. The moment she saw him, she walked over. "Where is Maya?" Daniel asked. Angela looked at him for a long second. "She's fine." Daniel let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. "Can I see her?" "Not yet." His heart started racing again. "What happened?" Angela folded her arms. "She collapsed at work." Daniel stared at her. "What?" "One of the nurses called me." "Was she hurt?" "No." "Then why did she collapse?" Angela looked away. "She hasn't been sleeping." Daniel felt a knot form in his stomach. She hasn't been eating much either. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Maya had always taken care of everyone else. She reminded people to eat. She told worried parents to get some rest. She was the strong one. The idea that she had been quietly falling apart made him feel sick. A doctor walked over and spoke softly with Angela. After a short conversation, he nodded toward Daniel. "You can see her for a few minutes," Angela said. Daniel followed the doctor down a long hallway. His footsteps felt heavy. He had imagined this moment 100 different ways. He had planned speeches, apologies, promises. Now, he couldn't think of a single word. The doctor stopped outside a room. "She needs to avoid stress." Daniel nodded. His hand rested on the door. Then, he slowly pushed it open. Maya was sitting up in bed. She wasn't connected to any machines. She looked tired, very tired. She looked toward the door. Their eyes met. Neither of them spoke. Daniel took a few careful steps inside. "How are you feeling?" "I'm okay." Her voice was quiet. He pulled a chair closer. "I'm glad you're all right." She nodded. The silence returned. Daniel hated it. But this time, he understood that he had created it. "I got a call from your mother." "I know. I was scared." Maya looked down at the blanket. "I was scared too." Daniel wanted to reach for her hand. He didn't. He wasn't sure she wanted him to. Finally he said, "I'm sorry." She looked at him. He had apologized before, after arguments, after family dinners, after long drives home. But this apology sounded different. Maybe because there were no excuses attached to it. Maya's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know what to do with your apology anymore." Daniel felt his chest tighten. "I know. You always say you're sorry. I know. You always promise things will change." He lowered his head. "I know." Maya wiped away a tear. "I'm just tired, Daniel." He had never heard her sound so defeated. A nurse knocked gently and entered the room. "Visiting time is almost over." Daniel stood up. "I'll leave." Maya nodded. As he reached the door, she spoke. "Daniel." He turned around. "When I left the house." She stopped for a moment. "I honestly thought you would come after me." He stared at her. She smiled sadly. "But you didn't." Daniel couldn't answer, because she was right. He had stood outside her mother's house. He had seen her. He had walked away. He had convinced himself he was giving her space. Now he wondered if she had seen it as one more sign that she was fighting alone. Outside the room, Angela was waiting. "Can we talk?" she asked. Daniel nodded. The two of them walked to the hospital cafeteria. Neither touched the coffee they ordered. Angela finally broke the silence. "Do you know why Maya stayed as long as she did?" Daniel shook his head. "Because she loved you." He closed his eyes. "I love her too." Angela nodded. "I know." "Then why did everything end like this?" Angela looked at him carefully. "Because love wasn't the problem." Daniel looked confused. "You stopped seeing what she was carrying." He didn't argue. He couldn't. Angela continued. "There were nights she came home from your parents' house and cried herself to sleep." Daniel looked down. "There were mornings she sat in my kitchen wondering if she was asking for too much." He covered his face with his hands. Angela's voice softened. "She wasn't asking you to choose between her and your family." "I know. She was asking you to remember that she was your family." When Daniel finally left the hospital, it was almost midnight. The rain had stopped. He sat inside his car without turning on the engine. His phone buzzed. It was a message from Rebecca. "Mom wants everyone over for dinner tomorrow night." Daniel stared at the screen. A few minutes later, another message arrived. "She thinks Maya is making a big mistake." Daniel read it twice. Then, a third message appeared. She said, "If Maya can't handle the family, maybe she was never the right woman for you." Daniel felt something inside him shift. For years, he would have ignored the comment. For years, he would have changed the subject. For years, he would have told himself that keeping quiet was easier. He looked back at the hospital building. He thought about Maya, sitting alone in that room. He thought about the letter. He thought about every time she had looked at him, hoping he would say something. Daniel picked up his phone. His thumb hovered over his mother's number. This time, he didn't put the phone away. This time, he pressed the call button. The line rang once, twice. Then Patricia answered. "Daniel, I was just talking about you." He took a slow breath. For the first time in his life, he was about to say the words he should have spoken years ago. "Daniel, I was just talking about you." His mother's voice sounded warm, almost cheerful. For a second, the old habit returned. He almost smiled. He almost pretended everything was normal. Then he looked through the windshield at the hospital behind him. Maya was inside that building, exhausted, heartbroken, and somehow, he knew that if he stayed silent one more time, he would lose her forever. "Mom," he said quietly, "we need to talk." Patricia laughed. "Can it wait until tomorrow? Everyone's coming for dinner." "No." Something in his voice made her stop talking. "What's wrong?" she asked. Daniel tightened his grip on the phone. "I went to the hospital tonight." There was a pause. "Is Maya all right?" "She collapsed at work." "My goodness." Patricia sounded surprised. Then she sighed. "She probably needs to slow down. I've always said she works too hard." Daniel closed his eyes. In the past, he would have accepted the comment. Tonight, he couldn't. "Mum." His voice was calm. "She's not carrying this by herself." "What does that mean?" "It means I've made mistakes." Patricia was quiet. "But it also means that some of the things said to Maya over the years have hurt her." Another silence. Then Patricia laughed softly. "Oh, Daniel, you're not still thinking about those little family jokes." He looked down at the dashboard. To his mother, they were jokes. To Maya, they had become wounds. They weren't jokes to her. Patricia's tone changed. "So, now I'm the bad person?" Daniel had heard that question his entire life. It was the question that ended every difficult conversation. The question that made everyone apologize, even when they had done nothing wrong. For years, he had fallen into the trap. Tonight, he didn't. "I'm not calling to blame anyone." "Then what are you calling for?" He took a deep breath. "I'm calling because things have to change." Patricia didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold. "I welcomed that girl into my family." Daniel looked toward the hospital. "Her name is Maya." "What?" "Her name is Maya." The words surprised even him. He had never corrected his mother before. Patricia sighed. "I don't know what's gotten into you." Daniel knew. He had spent too many years trying to be the son everyone expected him to be. Somewhere along the way, he had forgotten to be the husband he promised to become. "You know what I think?" Patricia said. "I think she's filling your head with nonsense." Daniel shook his head. "No." "Then who is?" He thought about the letter, the empty house, the hospital room. "No one had to fill my head with anything." Patricia became quiet again. Then she asked, "So, what exactly do you want?" Daniel answered without hesitation. "I want my wife to be treated with respect." Patricia laughed. "Respect goes both ways." "It does." "Then she owes me an apology too." Daniel frowned. "For what?" He stared out the windshield. His mother truly believed Maya had done something wrong. That realization hurt more than he expected. She left because she was unhappy. People don't walk out of a marriage because they're unhappy. They do when they feel alone. The conversation ended badly. Patricia refused to apologize. Daniel refused to argue. But for the first time in his life, he didn't give in. He ended the call with 4 words his mother had never heard from him. "I can't agree with that." Then he hung up. The next afternoon, Daniel went back to the hospital. Angela met him outside the room. "She's resting." He nodded. "I don't want to upset her." Angela studied his face. "You talked to your mother." Daniel looked surprised. "How did you know?" She smiled sadly. "Your face." He almost laughed. "I should have done it years ago." Angela opened the door. "Maybe." Then she looked at him. "But you can't change years ago." Maya was sitting by the window. Sunlight filled the room. She looked stronger than the night before. Daniel walked in slowly. "Hi." "Hi." He sat down. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Daniel said, "I talked to my mother." Maya looked at him. "And?" "I told her things have to change." She didn't react. "I told her you deserve respect." Still nothing. "I should have said it a long time ago." Maya looked out the window. "I spent a long time waiting to hear that." Daniel nodded. "I know." She turned back toward him. "No, Daniel." Her voice was soft. "You don't know." He felt his chest tighten. "I waited during birthdays." She looked down at her hands. "I waited at Christmas." Her eyes filled with tears. I waited through family dinners, vacations, and ordinary Sundays. Daniel couldn't look away, and every single time. She paused. I told myself that maybe next time you would choose us. A tear rolled down her cheek. But eventually people stopped waiting. Daniel wanted to promise her everything. He wanted to promise he would change. He wanted to promise the future would be different. But he remembered something Marcus had once told him. People trust actions more than words. So he simply said, I'm going to prove it. Maya looked at him for a long moment. Then she quietly asked, what if it's too late? Daniel had no answer. Later that evening, he returned to the empty house. As he walked toward the front door, he noticed a car parked across the street. Rebecca stepped out. I've been waiting for you. Daniel frowned. What happened? She looked nervous. Mom knows you talked to Maya. So? Rebecca took a deep breath. She's angry. Daniel almost smiled. His mother had been angry before. It wasn't new. But Rebecca didn't smile back. Daniel. What? She said if you choose Maya over the family. He stared at his sister. Then you shouldn't come back either. The words hung in the air. The old Daniel would have panicked. He would have apologized. He would have tried to make everyone happy. Instead, he looked at the empty house behind him. Then he thought about Maya sitting alone in a hospital room. For the first time, the choice seemed simple. But he also knew that some decisions change the rest of your life. Rebecca looked at him anxiously. What are you going to do? Daniel slowly reached into his pocket. He pulled out his house keys. Then he looked toward the dark street where he had grown up. And for the first time, he wondered if saving his marriage might mean losing the family he had spent his whole life trying to protect. Daniel barely slept that night. Rebecca's words kept replaying in his mind. If you choose Maya over the family, then you shouldn't come back either. He had spent his entire life trying to avoid that exact moment. As a boy, he learned that keeping everyone happy was the safest choice. As a man, he built his marriage around that same belief. Now, he was beginning to understand something he had never wanted to admit. Trying to please everyone had left the two people he cared about most standing on opposite sides of a line, and sooner or later, he was going to have to choose where he stood. The next morning, Daniel went to work. He tried to focus. He opened emails, answered phone calls, attended a meeting, but his mind stayed somewhere else. Just before lunch, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Rebecca. Mom is having everyone over tonight. She expects you to come. A few seconds later, another message arrived. Please don't make things worse. Daniel stared at the screen. He knew exactly what would happen if he went. His mother would cry. His uncles would tell him that marriage was making him weak. Someone would say Maya had changed him. And as always, everyone would expect Daniel to smooth things over. For 36 years, he had done exactly that. He locked his phone and put it back in his pocket. That evening, he drove home instead of going to his mother's house. He had just stepped inside when someone knocked at the door. It was Marcus. I figured you'd need company. Daniel managed a small smile. You always show up at the right time. Marcus looked around the empty living room. Any word from Maya? Daniel shook his head. No. Marcus handed him a small paper bag. Inside were 2 cheeseburgers and fries. Daniel laughed quietly. I don't think I've eaten all day. Marcus sat down. For a while, neither man spoke. Finally, Marcus asked, Are you going to your mother's dinner? No. Marcus nodded. What are you going to do instead? Daniel looked around the house. I don't know. Marcus leaned back. Then, let me ask you something. Daniel waited. If Maya walked through that front door right now and asked you to leave all this behind and start over somewhere else? He looked directly at Daniel. Would you do it? Daniel didn't answer. Not because he didn't know, because he was afraid of what the answer meant. Across town, Maya had been discharged from the hospital. Angela insisted she stay at her house for a while. You need to rest. I'm fine, Mom. Angela smiled. No, you're strong. She placed a blanket over Maya's legs. Those are 2 different things. Maya looked out the window. She had turned her phone off. She wasn't ready for conversations. She wasn't ready for apologies. She wasn't even sure she was ready to think about Daniel. Angela sat beside her. Do you want to know something? Maya looked over. When I was your age, I believed love could fix everything. A small smile crossed Maya's face. What changed your mind? Angela took a slow breath. I learned that love and effort are not the same thing. The room became quiet. After a while, Maya asked, Do you think people can change? Angela looked at her daughter. I think they can. Maya's eyes filled with uncertainty. But I also think people have to want to change more than they want to stay comfortable. That same evening, Patricia Carter sat at the head of the dining table. The family had gathered. Everyone was there, except Daniel. His empty chair seemed to irritate her more than she expected. Rebecca noticed. Maybe he's with Maya. Patricia placed her fork on the table. He should be here. One of Daniel's uncles nodded. Family comes first. Rebecca looked around the table. She had stayed quiet for years. She had watched Maya smile through uncomfortable dinners. She had watched her brother say nothing. And suddenly, she was tired too. What if Maya is his family? The room became silent. Patricia looked at her daughter. What did you say? Rebecca swallowed. I said, what if she is the family he should be protecting? Patricia stood up. I will not have this conversation in my house. Rebecca slowly pushed her chair back. Maybe that's been the problem. Every eye in the room followed her as she walked toward the front door. Patricia called after her. If you leave now, don't expect an apology from me. Rebecca stopped. Then she quietly answered, I'm not the one waiting for one. The front door closed. Daniel was sitting on the back porch when his phone rang. It was Rebecca. He answered immediately. What's wrong? I left Mom's house. Daniel sat up. What happened? I told her the truth. He was quiet. How bad was it? Rebecca laughed sadly. You know our family. Daniel looked out into the dark yard. I'm sorry. For what? For making you deal with this alone. Rebecca smiled. I wasn't alone. He frowned. What do you mean? She hesitated. Then she said, I think Maya was alone for both of us. The words stayed with Daniel long after the call ended. The next morning, he made a decision. He drove to Angela's neighborhood. He didn't go to the house. Instead, he parked across the street. He watched the front yard. A few minutes later, the front door opened. Maya walked outside. She was carrying a small watering can. She moved slowly from one flower bed to another. Daniel sat quietly. She looked peaceful. For a moment, he almost started the car and drove away. Then Maya looked up. Their eyes met across the street. Neither moved. Neither smiled. Daniel stepped out of the car. Maya stood still. He walked toward the sidewalk. She didn't leave. When he was only a few feet away, he stopped. I didn't come to ask you to come home. Maya waited. I came to tell you that I finally understand. She looked at him carefully. No. Her voice was gentle. You finally understand that you're losing me. Daniel felt the truth of her words. She wasn't trying to hurt him. She was simply being honest. He lowered his head. Maybe? Maya held the watering can against her side. I spent years hoping you would see what was happening. He nodded. I know. She shook her head. You keep saying that. Daniel looked into her eyes. What can I do? For the first time since they had met, Maya didn't have an answer. She looked away. Then she quietly said something Daniel never expected to hear. I don't know if I want you to fix this anymore. The words hit harder than any argument ever could. Daniel stood frozen. He had spent weeks afraid that Maya would leave. Now he was facing something even worse. The possibility that she had already let him go. Just then, the front door opened behind her. Angela stepped outside. She looked from Maya to Daniel. Then she spoke. There's someone inside who wants to see you. Daniel frowned. Who? Angela hesitated. Then she answered, your father. Daniel stood perfectly still. He thought he had heard Angela wrong. My father? Angela nodded. He's been here for almost an hour. Daniel looked past her toward the house. His father, Richard Carter, rarely visited anyone. After retiring, he had become even quieter than before. Most family gatherings revolved around Patricia. Richard usually sat in the corner, reading a newspaper or watching television. He rarely interrupted anyone. He rarely argued, and he almost never spoke about feelings. Daniel looked at Maya. She looked just as surprised. I didn't know he was coming, she said. Angela stepped aside. He asked if he could talk to both of you. Daniel slowly walked toward the house. His heart was beating almost as hard as it had the night Angela called from the hospital. Richard was sitting in the living room. A cup of untouched coffee rested on the table beside him. His hair had turned almost completely grey. The lines on his face seemed deeper than Daniel remembered. When he looked up, father and son simply stared at each other. Finally, Richard stood. You look tired. Daniel almost laughed. So do you. For a moment, neither man knew what to say. Angela quietly led Maya into the kitchen, giving them privacy. Richard looked around the room. Then he spoke. Your mother told me what happened. Daniel folded his arms. I'm sure she did. Richard nodded. She thinks you've turned against the family. Daniel looked toward the kitchen where Maya was. I haven't turned against anyone. Richard looked at his son carefully. Then what are you doing? Daniel answered honestly. I'm trying to save my marriage. Richard sat back down. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he asked a question Daniel had never expected. Do you know why I came here? Daniel shook his head. Richard looked toward the window. Because I made the same mistake you're making. Daniel frowned. What do you mean? His father smiled sadly. I spent 40 years keeping quiet. The room became completely still. Daniel had never heard his father talk like this. Not once. Richard leaned forward. When your mother and my own parents disagreed, I stayed silent. Daniel listened. When your mother hurt people's feelings, I stayed silent. His voice grew quieter. When she hurt mine. He paused. I stayed silent then too. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. As a child, he had believed his father was strong. Now, he was seeing a different man, a tired man, a regretful man. I thought I was keeping the family together, Richard continued. I told myself that avoiding arguments made me a good husband. Daniel slowly sat down. But all I really did. His father looked at his hands. Was, teach my children that silence was normal. Daniel couldn't speak. Memories rushed back. His father sitting quietly at dinner. His mother making every decision. Arguments ending because one person stopped talking. He had learned that behavior somewhere. Now, he knew exactly where. Richard looked at him. I watched you become me. The words cut deep. And I never stopped it. Daniel looked toward the kitchen. Maya was talking quietly with Angela. She couldn't hear them. I don't know how to fix this. Richard nodded. You may not be able to. Daniel stared at his father. But if you really love her. Richard paused. Don't spend the rest of your life waiting for the perfect moment to do the right thing. A few minutes later, Maya walked back into the room. She smiled politely at Richard. He stood up. I owe you an apology. Maya looked surprised. You don't have to. Yes, Richard interrupted gently. I do. The room fell silent. I watched things happen. He looked down. I knew they were wrong. Maya didn't speak, but I told myself it wasn't my place. His eyes filled with regret, and because I stayed quiet, my son learned to stay quiet too. Maya looked at Daniel, then back at Richard. I never wanted to break your family apart. Richard shook his head. You didn't. His voice was steady. We did. After a while, Richard decided to leave. At the front door, he stopped beside Daniel. Your mother is angry. Daniel nodded. I know. Richard placed a hand on his son's shoulder. She's also afraid. Daniel frowned. Afraid of what? Richard looked back at the house. People who always control everything are often the ones most afraid of losing it. Then he walked away. The afternoon passed quietly. Daniel and Maya sat on the back porch. A small wooden table stood between them. For the first time in weeks, there was no argument. No raised voices. No family around them. Just two people who had loved each other and didn't know what came next. Daniel finally spoke. My father said he watched me become him. Maya looked at him. Do you think that's true? He nodded. I do. She looked out at the garden. I used to wonder why you never fought for us. Daniel waited. I thought maybe I wasn't worth the trouble. He immediately shook his head. No. Then what was it? He took a long breath. I was afraid. Maya looked at him carefully. Of my mother. Of disappointing people. He looked down at his hands. Of conflict. A tear rolled down Maya's cheek. You know what I was afraid of? Daniel shook his head. I was afraid that one day I'd stop recognizing myself. The words settled heavily between them. As the sun began to set, Daniel stood up. I want to ask you something. Maya looked at him. Would you go to dinner with me tomorrow? She seemed surprised. Just dinner? He nodded. No family. No arguments. No promises I can't keep. She looked away. I don't know. Daniel accepted the answer. He didn't push. He didn't beg. He simply nodded. If you change your mind, I'll be waiting. He turned and started walking toward his car. Daniel, he stopped. He looked back. Maya stood on the porch holding the railing. You said you finally understand. I do. She held his gaze. Then understand this too. His heart raced. I still love you. Hope flickered across his face. Then she finished speaking. But I'm not sure I can trust you anymore. Daniel nodded slowly. He didn't argue. He didn't make excuses. He simply got into his car and drove away. That night, he returned to the empty house. As he walked to the mailbox, he noticed a large envelope. There was no return address. His name was written across the front. He carried it inside and placed it on the kitchen table. Slowly, he opened it. Several photographs slipped onto the floor. Daniel bent down and picked up the first one. It was a picture from his wedding day. He and Maya were smiling at each other. Someone had circled a sentence from their wedding vows in black ink. I will stand beside you, no matter who stands against us. His hands started shaking. He looked inside the envelope again. There was one more item, a folded document. He opened it. His face turned pale. At the top of the page were 3 words: petition for divorce. Daniel sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The divorce papers remained open in front of him. He read the first page, then the second, then he stopped. The words had become blurry. He closed his eyes. Somewhere in the house, the old wall clock continued to tick. The sound seemed louder than usual. He remembered the day he and Maya bought that clock. They had spent an entire Saturday decorating their first home. Maya had stood in the middle of the living room and laughed. This place finally feels like ours. Daniel had wrapped his arms around her. It always will. Back then, he believed promises lasted simply because people meant them. He was beginning to understand that promises survive only when people protect them. He looked at the documents again. Maya had signed them. The date was from 3 days earlier. 3 days. She had made the decision while he was sitting alone, believing she only needed time. His phone was lying beside the papers. He picked it up. He thought about calling her. Then he put it back down. What could he possibly say? Don't leave? She had asked him not to leave her side for years. Stay? She had spent years asking him to stand beside her. He realized something painful. The words he needed now were the same words Maya had needed long ago. The next morning, Daniel took the day off from work. He drove to the office of the attorney whose name appeared on the documents. He sat in his car across the street. People walked in and out of the building. Some looked angry. Some looked relieved. Some simply looked tired. Daniel wondered what he looked like. After a few minutes, he started the engine. Then he turned it off again. Finally, he drove away. He wasn't ready. Not to sign, not to fight, not to admit that the life he had built was ending. That afternoon, Rebecca came by the house. The moment she saw the papers, she understood. She filed? Daniel nodded. Rebecca sat down across from him. Neither of them spoke for a while. Finally, she asked, "Are you surprised?" Daniel wanted to say yes. He wanted to say he never saw it coming. But the truth had become harder to avoid. No. Rebecca looked at her brother. "I don't think she wanted a divorce." Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" "I think she wanted a husband who would fight for the marriage." He lowered his eyes. "And when she stopped believing that would happen?" Rebecca looked at the papers. She started protecting herself. Across town, Maya was helping her mother organize old books in the garage. She stacked one box after another. Angela watched her quietly. "You don't have to keep yourself busy every minute." Maya smiled. "If I stop, I think." "And what happens when you think?" Maya placed another book into the box. "I remember." Angela walked over. "Do you want to talk about it?" Maya shook her head. Then, she stopped working. "There was a time," she said softly, "when I believed Daniel would come after me." Angela listened. "I thought he would knock on the door and tell me we were going to fix everything." She smiled sadly. "I waited." Angela put an arm around her shoulders. "How long?" Maya looked toward the house. "Long enough to realize I was the only one waiting." That evening, Daniel received a call from his father. "Can we meet?" Daniel agreed. They met at a small diner on the edge of town. Richard was already sitting in a booth when Daniel arrived. Neither of them ordered food. Richard looked at his son. "Your mother told me about the divorce papers. She says you should sign them." Daniel looked surprised. "She said that?" Richard sighed. "She believes Maya has already made her choice." Daniel looked down at the table. "What do you believe?" Richard was quiet for a long moment. Then he answered, "I believe some things are worth fighting for." Daniel almost laughed. "You never fought." His father accepted the words. "No." He looked out the window. "And I have regretted that for longer than you have been alive." When Daniel returned home, he found himself standing in front of the hallway closet. Inside was an old cardboard box. Maya had packed it years earlier. Written across the top were 2 words, "Our dreams." He slowly opened it. Inside were things they had collected during their marriage. A brochure for a beach vacation they never took. Paint samples for the nursery they once planned to decorate. A notebook filled with ideas for their future home. At the bottom of the box was a folded sheet of paper. Daniel opened it. It was a list. Maya had written it during the first year of their marriage. "Things I want us to do together." He smiled through the tears. "Take dancing lessons. Travel to New York at Christmas. Plant a garden. Adopt a dog. Grow old together." The last one was underlined. Daniel sat on the floor holding the paper. He couldn't remember the last time they had talked about dreams. Somewhere along the way, they had become too busy surviving. The next afternoon, there was another knock at the front door. Daniel opened it. A man in a delivery uniform handed him a small envelope. No signature needed. Daniel frowned. Who sent it? The man shrugged. No idea. After he left, Daniel looked at the envelope. It had no name, no address. He opened it. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Maya standing outside the courthouse. The same courthouse where divorce cases were handled. Written on the back, in handwriting he recognized, were 6 words. I waited longer than you know. Daniel turned the photograph over again. His heart sank, because he knew that handwriting. It belonged to Maya, and for the first time since she walked out of the house, Daniel realized something that terrified him. She wasn't threatening to leave anymore. She had already started saying goodbye. Daniel sat on the living room couch with the photograph in his hand. He read the words over and over. I waited longer than you know. He didn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, memories returned. Maya standing alone at family dinners. Maya looking out the passenger window during long drives home. Maya asking one simple question. Would you do the same for me? Back then, he thought there would always be another chance. Now he wondered how many chances she had given him without him ever noticing. The next morning, he made a decision. He drove to the courthouse. He wasn't there to stop the divorce. He wasn't there to argue. He simply wanted to understand. The building was busy. People hurried through the hallways carrying folders and paperwork. Daniel sat on a wooden bench in the lobby. An older janitor was mopping the floor nearby. After a few minutes, the man looked over and smiled. Tough day? Daniel nodded. You could say that. The janitor leaned on the mop. Marriage? Daniel looked surprised. Is it that obvious? The man laughed quietly. I've worked here 22 years. Daniel looked around the building. Do people ever change their minds? The old man thought about the question. Some do. And the others? They usually waited too long. The answer stayed with Daniel long after the conversation ended. As he walked toward the exit, he saw someone familiar. Angela Brooks. She was carrying a folder. Daniel stopped. She looked up and noticed him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Finally, Daniel asked, Is Maya here? Angela shook her head. No. He looked at the folder. Is that? Angela nodded. The attorney wanted a few documents. Daniel lowered his eyes. So it's really happening. Angela didn't answer. Instead, she sat down on a nearby bench. Daniel sat beside her. After a long silence, Angela spoke. Do you know what Maya did the night before your wedding? Daniel looked at her. No. She couldn't sleep. A small smile crossed Angela's face. She sat in the kitchen until 3 in the morning talking about you. Daniel listened quietly. She said she had finally found a man who made her feel safe. His chest tightened. Angela continued. She believed that no matter what happened in life, you would never let her stand alone. Daniel covered his face with his hands. I failed her. Angela looked at him. Yes. He looked up. But that doesn't mean you never loved her. When Daniel got home, he found his father waiting on the front porch. Richard stood up. I thought you might need this. He handed Daniel a small wooden box. Daniel frowned. What is it? It belonged to your grandfather. They walked inside. Daniel opened the box. Inside were old letters tied together with a faded blue ribbon. My grandfather wrote these. Richard nodded. To your grandmother. Daniel picked one up. The paper was yellow with age. He unfolded it carefully. I was a difficult man to love, the first line read. He looked at his father. Why are you showing me this? Richard sat down. Because your grandfather almost lost his marriage. Daniel looked surprised. He did? Richard nodded. He spent years putting work and pride ahead of his family. What happened? Richard smiled sadly. Your grandmother left. Daniel felt his heart sink. Did she come back? Eventually. Hope flashed across Daniel's face. Then Richard quietly added, but she came back because he changed. The room became silent. Not because he promised to. That evening, Daniel read every letter in the box. Some were short. Some were several pages long. None of them blamed anyone. They were simple, honest. One sentence stood out. The people we love should never have to wonder whose side we're on. Daniel folded the letter and stared out the window. He had spent weeks thinking about what he wanted to say to Maya. Maybe he had been thinking about the wrong thing. Maybe words were no longer enough. The following afternoon, Maya returned to the house she once shared with Daniel. Angela had encouraged her to collect the rest of her belongings. She parked in the driveway and sat in the car for a few minutes. The house looked exactly the same, but it didn't feel the same. She walked to the front door and unlocked it. Daniel wasn't there. She was relieved. She wasn't ready to see him. She quietly walked through the rooms. She packed books, photographs, clothes, little pieces of the life they had built together. When she entered the spare bedroom, she stopped. The cardboard box labeled Our Dreams was sitting on the floor. She frowned. She had left it there. Slowly, she opened it. Everything was inside. Nothing had been thrown away. On top of the box was a single folded note. Maya recognized Daniel's handwriting. Her hands trembled as she opened it. There were only 2 sentences. I spent years asking you to understand me. I should have spent those years understanding you. Maya sat down on the floor. Tears filled her eyes. She folded the note and placed it back in the box. Then she stood up and continued packing. As she carried the last box toward the front door, she heard a car pull into the driveway. Her heart started beating faster. A few seconds later, the front door opened. Daniel stepped inside. Neither of them had expected to see the other. For a moment, they simply stood there. Then Daniel noticed the boxes. Almost everything was gone. The walls looked emptier. The shelves looked emptier. The house looked emptier. He looked at Maya. "You're taking the rest of your things?" She nodded. He wanted to ask her to stop. He wanted to tell her not to leave. But he remembered his grandfather's letters. Promises mean nothing without change. So he stepped aside. Maya looked surprised. He looked at the boxes. "I'll help you carry them." She stared at him. "What?" "I'll help." She didn't understand. Neither did he. But for the first time in a very long time, Daniel wasn't thinking about what was easiest for him. He picked up the heaviest box and walked toward her car. Maya followed quietly. Neither of them spoke. When the last box had been loaded, she opened the driver's door. Daniel stood beside the car. "I hope one day you find peace." Maya looked at him. A tear rolled down her cheek. "I wanted to find it with you." She got into the car. Daniel stepped back. The engine started. Slowly she drove away. He stood in the driveway until the car disappeared around the corner. Then he looked down. Something was lying on the ground where Maya's car had been parked. He walked over and picked it up. It was a small silver key. He recognized it immediately. It was the key to the safety deposit box they had rented together after they got married. Daniel frowned. He had almost forgotten about it. As he turned the key over in his hand, his phone rang. It was the bank. The woman on the line sounded professional. "Mr. Carter?" "Yes. I'm calling because Mrs. Carter was here this morning." Daniel's heart began to race. "What about her?" There was a brief pause. "She asked us to prepare the contents of your shared safety deposit box." Daniel looked at the key. "What was inside?" The woman answered quietly, "I'm sorry, sir. I can't discuss the contents over the phone." The call ended. Daniel stared at the silver key in his hand. Somewhere inside that box was something Maya had decided he needed to see. And deep down, he was afraid it might be the final chapter of the life they once planned to share. Daniel thought the divorce papers were the hardest thing he would ever have to face. He was wrong. Because Maya has left behind one final piece of their shared life. A secret, locked inside a safety deposit box. A secret filled with dreams they once built together. Dreams that may explain why she finally stopped waiting. If you've been touched by Daniel and Maya's journey, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next chapter. Because in Chapter 6, Daniel is about to discover that the greatest heartbreak isn't losing the person you love. It's realizing they never stopped loving you. Daniel arrived at the bank before it opened. The silver key never left his hand. He had spent the entire night wondering what Maya had placed inside the safety deposit box. Old jewelry, important documents, their wedding rings? The more he thought about it, the less certain he became. At exactly 9 o'clock, the doors unlocked. A bank employee greeted him politely. "Good morning, Mr. Carter." Daniel nodded. "I received a call yesterday." The woman smiled professionally. "Yes, sir, please follow me." She led him through a quiet hallway and into a secure room. A few minutes later, she returned carrying a small metal box. She placed it on the table. "Take all the time you need." Then she quietly left. Daniel looked at the key. His hands were shaking. Slowly, he unlocked the box. The lid opened. He stared inside. There was no money, no jewelry, no legal papers, only a large brown envelope. Written across the front were 4 simple words. "For our future children." Daniel felt his chest tighten. He carefully opened the envelope. Inside were letters, dozens of them. Each one had a date. Some were years old, some were newer. On top of the stack was a folded note. "Daniel, if you're reading this, then the future we planned together probably never happened." His eyes filled with tears. He sat down and continued reading. "I started writing these letters after we talked about having children. I thought it would be something beautiful, a way for our son or daughter to know who we were before they were born." Daniel looked through the envelope. Every letter had a title. "The day your father proposed," "The first house we bought," "The road trip we never forgot," "The day we dreamed about you." His breathing became unsteady. Maya had been building a future, even while she was hurting. He picked up one of the letters. "Dear little one, your father is one of the kindest people I have ever met." Daniel stopped reading. He closed his eyes. After everything that had happened, Maya had still written those words. He forced himself to continue. He notices when strangers need help. He remembers birthdays. He makes people feel safe. A tear rolled down Daniel's face. Then he reached the next sentence. I just hope one day he realizes that the people closest to him need that same kindness too. Daniel slowly lowered the letter. The empty room felt smaller. He spent almost an hour reading. One letter described the tiny yellow bedroom Maya wanted to decorate. Another talked about teaching their future children to ride bicycles. One was about family traditions. She wanted movie nights, Christmas cookies, summer vacations, Sunday breakfasts, simple things, ordinary things, the kind of life they had once promised each other. At the very bottom of the envelope was one final letter. Unlike the others, it had never been sealed. The date was only 2 weeks old. Daniel unfolded it. Dear little one, I don't know if you will ever exist. And if you don't, I want you to know that it wasn't because you weren't loved. Daniel could barely breathe. Sometimes good people meet at the wrong moment in their lives. Sometimes they carry fears they don't know how to put down. Sometimes they hurt each other without ever meaning to. His hands trembled. I wanted you to grow up in a home where both of your parents stood together. I don't think I can give you that anymore. Daniel covered his mouth. He couldn't finish the letter, not yet. When he finally left the bank, the envelope was tucked safely under his arm. He sat inside his car and looked at the steering wheel. For the first time since Maya left, he didn't think about what he had lost. He thought about what they had almost built, and what his choices had destroyed. Across town, Maya was sitting on Angela's porch. She looked out at the garden her mother had spent years caring for. Angela joined her with 2 cups of tea. You went to the bank? Maya nodded. I did. Angela handed her a cup. Do you think he'll open it? Maya stared at the flowers. Yes. Why? A sad smile crossed her face. Because he always cared about the future. Angela looked at her daughter. And the present? Maya looked away. The present was harder for him. That afternoon, Daniel drove to Marcus's apartment. He carried the envelope with him. Marcus opened the door. You look awful. Daniel managed a weak smile. I feel worse. They sat at the kitchen table. Daniel handed him one of the letters. Marcus read it quietly. When he finished, he looked at his friend. She never stopped loving you. Daniel nodded. I know. Marcus placed the letter down. Then why did she give these up? Daniel looked out the window. Because eventually, hope gets tired too. Later that evening, Daniel returned to the house. He walked into the spare bedroom. The room was almost empty now. The walls where Maya had planned to hang family pictures were bare. He stood there for a long time. Then he opened a closet. Inside was a paint sample card. Soft yellow. Maya had picked it for the nursery. Daniel sat down on the floor. He thought about the letters, the dreams, the future children who would never read them. And for the first time in his adult life, Daniel Carter cried without trying to hide it. The next morning, someone knocked on the front door. Daniel wiped his face and answered. A young woman stood outside. She looked nervous. Mr. Carter? Yes. My name is Olivia. Daniel frowned. I work with Maya. His heart skipped a beat. Is she all right? Olivia nodded. She's fine. Daniel relaxed. Then why are you here? The young nurse looked down at the envelope she was holding. Maya asked me to give you this if she ever decided to go through with the divorce. Daniel slowly took it. What is it? Olivia looked at him sadly. It's something she never wanted you to find out this way. Daniel looked at the envelope. His name was written across the front. Below it, in Maya's handwriting, were 7 words that made the world around him disappear. The reason I stopped believing in us. Daniel stood at the front door holding the envelope. Olivia waited quietly. Aren't you going to open it? She asked. Daniel looked down at Maya's handwriting. For some reason, he was afraid. Not of what she had written, but of the possibility that she had finally given up on him. When did she give you this? He asked. Olivia thought for a moment. About 3 weeks ago. Daniel felt his heart sink. She said if she changed her mind, she'd ask for it back. He looked up. Did she ever ask for it? Olivia slowly shook her head. No. Then she turned and walked away. Daniel stood alone on the porch. The envelope suddenly felt heavier than it should have. He walked inside and sat at the kitchen table. The same table where he and Maya had eaten breakfast together. The same table where they had planned vacations. The same table where they had once talked about children. Slowly, he opened the envelope. Inside was a single folded letter. He unfolded it carefully. The first line stole the air from his lungs. Daniel, this isn't the day I stopped loving you. His eyes filled with tears. He kept reading. I need you to know something. Leaving you was never what I wanted. I fought for us longer than you realize. I defended you when people told me to walk away. I made excuses for you because I knew the kind man you could be. Daniel closed his eyes. He remembered friends, asking Maya if she was happy. He remembered her smiling. He wondered how many of those smiles had been for his sake. He forced himself to continue. The day I stopped believing in us, wasn't the day your mother insulted me. It wasn't the day you stayed quiet at another family dinner. It wasn't even the day I left our home. Daniel's hands trembled. He turned the page. It was the day I realized you saw my pain and believed I would simply learn to live with it. A tear rolled down his face. You always looked sorry. You always promised tomorrow would be different. But eventually I understood that I was building a future with a man who was waiting for the perfect moment to become my partner. And life doesn't wait for perfect moments. Daniel lowered the letter. The kitchen was silent. He looked around the room. He remembered Maya painting the walls, dancing while music played, laughing because they had spilled paint on each other. They had been happy, very happy. He wondered when happiness had turned into survival. His phone rang. It was Marcus. You all right? Daniel laughed quietly. No. Marcus heard something in his friend's voice. What happened? Daniel looked at the letter. I know why she left. There was a pause. And? Daniel swallowed. She stopped believing I would ever change. Marcus didn't answer, because there was nothing to say. That afternoon, Daniel drove to his parents' house. He had not planned to. His hands simply turned the steering wheel. When he arrived, Patricia was watering flowers. She looked surprised. I wasn't expecting you. Daniel nodded. We need to talk. She smiled. Come inside. No. Something in his voice made her stop. They stood in the front yard, the same yard where Daniel had played as a child, the same yard where he had learned to avoid disappointing people. I read something today. Patricia folded her arms. What? A letter from Maya. Her expression changed. Oh. Daniel looked at his mother. Did you ever think she was unhappy? Patricia sighed. Marriage is difficult. That's not what I asked. She looked away. I thought she'd adjust. The words struck him. Adjust? Every family has traditions. Daniel shook his head. She wasn't asking to change traditions. Patricia frowned. Then what did she want? Daniel answered quietly. She wanted kindness. His mother became defensive. So now everything is my fault? Daniel closed his eyes. For years that question had ended every conversation. This time, he stayed calm. This isn't about blame. Then what is it about? It's about responsibility. Patricia looked confused. Daniel continued. I am responsible for staying silent. The words surprised her. And you are responsible for the things you chose to say. She stared at him. For the first time in his life, her son wasn't backing away. I never hated Maya, Patricia whispered. Daniel believed her. I know. I wanted what was best for you. He nodded. I know that too. She looked at him hopefully. Then why are we even having this conversation? Daniel looked toward the street. Because wanting the best for someone and hurting them can happen at the same time. When he left his parents' house, he didn't feel victorious. He felt sad. Sad for his mother. Sad for his father. Sad for himself. Families were complicated. Love was complicated. But he was finally beginning to understand that protecting people from uncomfortable truths often creates deeper pain. That evening, Maya sat on Angela's back porch. She watched the sunset. Angela joined her. You've been quiet. Maya smiled faintly. I've been thinking. About Daniel? She nodded. I keep remembering the man I married. Angela waited. He wasn't cruel. No. He wasn't selfish. No. Maya looked out across the yard. He was just afraid. Angela gently placed a hand over her daughter's. And what about you? Maya's eyes filled with tears. I'm afraid too. Of what? She took a slow breath. I'm afraid he'll finally become the husband I needed. Her voice broke. After, I've already stopped waiting. Late that night, Daniel returned home. He placed Maya's letter beside the envelope from the safety deposit box. Then he noticed something. A small folded piece of paper had fallen onto the floor. It must have slipped out earlier. He picked it up. It wasn't addressed to him. Across the front were 3 words. To my mother. Daniel frowned. He slowly unfolded it. The first sentence made him stop breathing. Mrs. Carter, I spent years trying to become the daughter you wanted. He looked at the rest of the page. Then he sat down, because he realized Maya hadn't only written a goodbye for him. She had written one for his mother too. And somehow, he knew that letter would change everything. Daniel sat alone in the living room. Maya's letter rested in his hands. It was addressed to Patricia Carter. Not to him. Not to Angela. To the woman she had spent years trying to become family with. He stared at the envelope for several minutes. Part of him felt guilty. It wasn't meant for him. But another part of him knew that Maya had left it behind for a reason. Slowly, he unfolded the paper. Mrs. Carter, I don't know if you will ever read this. Maybe I won't be brave enough to give it to you. Maybe one day I'll decide to throw it away. But I need to write the things I've spent years keeping inside. Daniel swallowed hard. He continued reading. When I married your son, I wasn't just gaining a husband. I believed I was gaining a family. I wanted you to like me. I wanted you to be proud of me. I wanted you to look at me and think that your son had chosen someone worthy of him. Daniel closed his eyes. He remembered Maya buying gifts before holidays, calling Patricia on her birthday, showing up early to help prepare dinners. He had noticed those things. He had simply never understood why they mattered so much. He opened his eyes and kept reading. So when you joked about my work, I smiled. When you criticized my cooking, I smiled. When you questioned my future as a wife and mother, I smiled. Not because those things didn't hurt, but because I believed that if I loved your son enough, one day you would love me too. Daniel felt tears building again. He turned the page. The hardest part was never the words. It was looking at Daniel and hoping he would see me. Every family dinner became a small test. Would today be the day he reached for my hand? Would today be the day he said, "That's enough"? Would today be the day I stopped feeling like a guest in my own marriage? Daniel lowered the letter. His chest hurt, because he knew the answer to every question. No, no, no. He folded the paper and drove to his parents' house. He didn't call first. He didn't want time to change his mind. Patricia answered the door. "You should have let me know you were coming." Daniel held up the letter. "We need to talk." She looked at the envelope. "What is that?" "A letter Maya wrote." Patricia frowned. "For you?" Her expression softened for a moment. Did she finally apologize? Daniel stared at his mother. "No." He walked into the living room. "I want you to read it." Patricia sat down. She opened the letter. The room became quiet. Daniel watched her eyes move across the page. At first, her face showed no emotion. Then she reached the second page. She stopped. She read the paragraph again. Her hands trembled slightly. Finally, she folded the letter. "I didn't know she felt this way." Daniel couldn't hide his disappointment. "She told us." Patricia looked up. "No, Mom." She never said these words. Daniel looked at the letter. She shouldn't have had to. Patricia stood and walked toward the window. "I grew up differently." Daniel stayed quiet. "My mother believed strong women didn't complain." She looked outside. "My father believed children obeyed their parents." Daniel listened. "When I married your father, I thought that's how families worked." She turned around. "I expected Maya to adjust because that's what I did." Daniel looked at his mother carefully. "And were you happy?" The question caught her off guard. She opened her mouth. Then she closed it. Years seemed to pass across her face in a few seconds. "I don't know." A knock came at the front door. Richard stepped inside. He looked from Patricia to Daniel. "Am I interrupting?" Daniel handed him the letter. Richard read it quietly. When he finished, he sat beside his wife. Patricia looked at him. "Did you know she felt this way?" Richard answered honestly. "I suspected." She stared at him. "And you didn't say anything?" Richard looked down. "No." Patricia laughed bitterly. "So, everyone stayed silent." Daniel looked at both of his parents. For the first time, he realized that silence had been passed through generations. Grandfather to father, father to son, fear becoming habit, habit becoming tradition. Across town, Maya was at the hospital. She had returned to work. Olivia was helping organize patient files. She smiled when she saw Maya. "I delivered the envelope." Maya nodded. "I figured you did." Olivia hesitated. "Do you regret it?" Maya looked through the window of the children's ward. A little boy was laughing while a nurse made balloon animals. She smiled softly. "No." Olivia looked surprised. "You don't?" Maya shook her head. "I regret that things ended this way." She paused. "But I don't regret finally telling the truth." That evening, Daniel returned home. His phone buzzed. It was Rebecca. "Mom has been crying all afternoon." Daniel sat down. A second message arrived. "Dad hasn't left her side once." Daniel stared at the screen. Then, another message came. "I think they're talking about things they've never talked about before." He looked toward the stack of letters on the table. One honest letter had done what years of silence never could. It had forced people to face themselves. The next morning, Daniel heard a car pull into the driveway. He looked through the window. His mother was standing outside. She wasn't carrying a purse. She wasn't dressed for a visit. She looked nervous. Daniel opened the door. Neither of them spoke. Finally, Patricia held out the letter. "I need you to take me somewhere." Daniel frowned. "Where?" She looked down at Maya's handwriting. Then she answered quietly, "I think it's time I apologized to your wife." Daniel looked at his mother in disbelief. For as long as he could remember, Patricia Carter had never apologized to anyone. Not to neighbors, not to friends, not even to family. She believed that time fixed hurt feelings. She believed people simply moved on. Yet, There she stood, holding Maya's letter with trembling hands. "I don't know what to say," Daniel admitted. Patricia looked away. "Neither do I." For a moment, they simply stood there. Then Daniel picked up his car keys. The drive to Angela Brooks's house was quiet. Patricia stared out the passenger window. The same roads she had traveled for years suddenly looked unfamiliar. Finally, she spoke. "Do you think she'll even want to see me?" Daniel answered honestly. "I don't know." His mother nodded. "I suppose I deserve that." It was the first time Daniel had ever heard her say anything like it. When they arrived, Angela was watering flowers in the front yard. She looked surprised. Then she noticed Patricia. The two women stood facing each other. Neither smiled. Angela slowly placed the watering can on the ground. "What are you doing here?" Patricia held up the letter. "I came to talk to Maya." Angela folded her arms. "That's not my decision." She looked toward the house. "I'll ask her." Inside, Maya was sitting at the dining room table, reading a book. Angela walked in quietly. "You have visitors." Maya looked up. "Who?" Angela hesitated. "Daniel." She paused. "And his mother." The color slowly disappeared from Maya's face. For a few seconds, she didn't move. Then, she quietly closed the book. "I don't think I can do this." Angela sat beside her. "You don't have to." Maya looked toward the window. "What if she just wants another argument?" Angela gently touched her hand. "Then you can walk away." Maya took a deep breath. After a long silence, she stood. Patricia was waiting on the front porch. Daniel stood a few steps behind her. The front door opened. Maya stepped outside. No one spoke. The wind moved softly through the trees. Finally, Patricia held out the letter. "I read it." Maya nodded. Patricia looked at the paper, then back at Maya. "I should have listened before you had to write it." Maya stayed quiet. "I thought I was protecting my son." A tear rolled down Patricia's cheek. "I never realized I was helping him lose you." Daniel looked at his mother in shock. He had never seen her cry. Maya crossed her arms. "I spent years trying to be enough for your family." Patricia lowered her head. "I know, no." Maya's voice remained calm. "You know now." The older woman couldn't argue. "I baked the meals you liked." She looked at Patricia. "I bought birthday gifts." "I know." I smiled when I wanted to cry. Patricia wiped her eyes. "I know." Maya looked toward the yard. "I kept thinking, if I tried harder, one day you'd accept me." The silence that followed was heavy. Finally, Patricia whispered, "I'm sorry." Maya closed her eyes. The words she had waited years to hear had finally arrived, but something inside her had changed. She opened her eyes again. "I believe that you're sorry." Patricia looked hopeful. "But I can't pretend the hurt never happened." The hope faded from Patricia's face. Daniel took one careful step forward. "Maya." She looked at him. "I don't expect forgiveness." She waited. "I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to become a better man." Maya studied his face. For the first time, she didn't see excuses. She didn't see fear. She saw regret, real regret. But regret and trust were not the same thing. "I hope you do become that man," she said quietly. Daniel's heart sank. The way she said it sounded like she was wishing him well, not waiting for him. Angela stepped outside and stood beside her daughter. No one spoke. After a moment, Patricia looked at Maya one last time. "If I could go back, I would change so many things." Maya smiled sadly. "So would I." Patricia nodded. Then she turned and walked toward the car. Daniel stayed where he was. He looked at Maya. "I'll keep fighting for us." She shook her head gently. "Don't fight for us because you're afraid to lose me." Daniel frowned. "Then why?" She looked into his eyes. "Become a better man because it's the right thing to do." Daniel drove his mother home. Neither of them spoke much. As Patricia got out of the car, she stopped. "Your father spent years hiding from difficult conversations." Daniel looked at her. "I know." She held Maya's letter against her chest. "I think I spent just as many years hiding from the truth." She closed the car door and walked inside. That evening, Daniel returned to his empty house. The mailbox was open. A small package had been left inside. There was no return address. He carried it into the kitchen. Inside was a tiny pair of white baby shoes. Daniel frowned. Beneath them was a folded receipt. It was from a children's store. The date was almost a year old. His hands started shaking. At the bottom of the box was a single envelope. He opened it. Inside was an ultrasound appointment card. The appointment had been scheduled 10 months earlier. Daniel stared at the card. His heart pounded. He looked at the date again. He had no memory of it. Then he noticed something written on the back in Maya's handwriting. "I wanted to surprise you, but life surprised us first." The card slipped from his hand. Daniel stood frozen. 1,000 thoughts rushed through his mind. Only one of them mattered. He grabbed his keys and ran for the front door. He had to find Maya, because he suddenly realized there was a part of their story he had never known, and he was terrified of what she had carried alone. Daniel drove to Angela's house without thinking. The tiny pair of baby shoes sat on the passenger seat. The ultrasound appointment card rested beside them. His hands tightened around the steering wheel. His heart refused to accept what his mind was beginning to understand. 10 months earlier, an appointment, baby shoes, a surprise. He whispered the question out loud. Why didn't she tell me? Deep inside, another voice answered. Maybe she tried. He reached Angela's house and hurried to the front door. Maya answered. The moment she saw his face, she knew something was wrong. Daniel? He held out the appointment card. Maya's expression changed. The color drained from her face. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Finally, she looked at the baby shoes in his hand. Where did you get those? They were left at the house. She closed her eyes. Daniel's voice trembled. Maya. He held up the card. What is this? A single tear rolled down her cheek. You weren't supposed to find that. Angela stepped into the hallway. She saw the card, then she quietly walked back into the living room, giving them privacy. Daniel looked at Maya. Were you... He couldn't finish the sentence. Maya nodded. Yes. His world seemed to stop. He struggled to breathe. You were pregnant? Another tear slipped down her face. Yes. Daniel took a step backward. When? She looked at the date on the card. About 10 months ago. He stared at her. His knees felt weak. We were going to have a baby? Maya nodded again. He covered his mouth with his hand. 100 memories rushed through his mind. Family dinners, arguments, silent drives home, the divorce papers, the letters, and all that time, she had been carrying something he never knew. Daniel finally found his voice. Why didn't you tell me? Maya looked at him with tired eyes. I wanted to. He waited. I bought the baby shoes. She looked at them. I made the appointment. Her voice shook. I even wrote a card telling you that you were going to be a father. Daniel felt tears filling his eyes. What happened? Maya looked away. I lost the baby. The words hung between them. The world became completely quiet. Daniel couldn't speak. He couldn't move. He simply stared at her. Maya slowly sat down on the porch steps. It happened while you were away on a business trip. Daniel remembered that trip. He had spent 3 days in another city. His mother had called him several times. Work had been busy. He had complained about the hotel food. He had no idea his entire future was changing. I was at the hospital. Maya's voice was barely above a whisper. The doctors said there was nothing they could do. Daniel sat beside her. She continued. When you came home, I wanted to tell you. He looked at her. Why didn't you? She laughed softly through her tears. Your family was having that big Sunday dinner. Daniel remembered. His mother had spent weeks planning it. You asked me not to make the night emotional. His heart broke. I said that? She nodded. You told me we could talk later. Daniel closed his eyes. He remembered. Just before they left the house, Maya had looked like she wanted to say something. He had kissed her forehead and told her they were running late. He had promised they would talk after dinner. They never did. I kept waiting. Maya said. For what? For the right moment. Daniel looked down. She smiled sadly. I guess I learned that from you. Those words hurt more than anything else she had ever said. Daniel reached for the baby shoes. His hands were shaking. You carried this alone? Maya nodded. My mother knew. He looked surprised. She drove me home from the hospital. Daniel looked toward the front door. Angela had known. She had watched her daughter grieve. She had watched her marriage fall apart. She had kept the secret because it wasn't hers to tell. I wasn't angry at you at first, Maya admitted. Daniel looked at her. I knew you didn't know. He nodded. But then, weeks passed. She looked down at her hands, and I realized something. His chest tightened. You were so busy keeping peace everywhere else. A tear rolled down her cheek. That you never noticed there was a war inside your own home. Daniel couldn't stop crying. For the first time since they had met, he didn't try to hide it. Angela quietly walked onto the porch. She sat beside her daughter. Daniel looked at her. You knew. Angela nodded. I did. Why didn't you tell me? Angela answered honestly. Because Maya asked me not to. He looked at Maya. Why? She took a slow breath. I didn't want you to stay with me because you felt guilty. Daniel shook his head. I would have been there. She looked into his eyes. I know. His face filled with hope. Then she finished speaking. But I don't know if you would have stayed there. He understood what she meant. His body might have been beside her, but his mind would have been divided. Work, family, keeping everyone happy, always somewhere else. Daniel stood up. He walked to the edge of the yard. He looked up at the sky. He thought about the child they would never meet, the room they never painted, the letters in the safety deposit box, the future they had almost built. Then he turned back toward Maya. His voice was quiet. "I'm so sorry." She nodded. "I know." "No." He wiped away his tears. "I'm sorry for all the things I never saw." Maya looked at him. For the first time in a long while, she saw the truth on his face. No excuses, no defenses, only grief. The same grief she had carried by herself. As the sun began to set, Daniel started walking toward his car. Maya called his name. He turned around. She held up a small white envelope. "I almost threw this away." He walked back. She placed it in his hand. "What is it?" "The card I wrote." He looked confused. "The one I was going to give you the day I found out about the baby." Daniel stared at the envelope. His hands trembled. "Can I read it?" Maya nodded. "But not here." He held it carefully. Then he looked at her one last time. She was standing beside her mother, the woman he had loved, the woman he had failed, the woman who had carried a heartbreak he never knew existed. Daniel got into his car and drove away. When he reached home, he sat at the kitchen table. Slowly, he opened the envelope. Inside was a handmade card. Across the front, written in Maya's handwriting, were 5 simple words. "You're going to be a dad." Daniel opened the card. A small photograph slipped onto the table. It was the baby's first ultrasound picture. On the back, Maya had written one final sentence. "I hope our child has your kind heart and learns to use it sooner than you did." Daniel sat at the kitchen table until sunrise. The handmade card was still open in front of him. Beside it lay the tiny ultrasound picture. He had looked at it so many times that he could almost remember every line. The words Maya had written stayed with him. "I hope our child has your kind heart and learns to use it sooner than you did." He closed his eyes. For the first time in his life, he wasn't thinking about himself. He was thinking about the little life they had almost shared. A son, a daughter, it didn't matter. There had been a future, and he had never even known it existed. The next morning, Daniel drove to a small park on the other side of town. He and Maya used to come there on Sunday afternoons. Families walked along the paths. Children laughed on the playground. A little girl ran past him holding her father's hand. Daniel looked away. He sat on an old wooden bench. A few minutes later, someone sat beside him. It was Richard. His father didn't say anything at first. He simply looked across the playground. "You know," Richard finally said, "your mother and I lost a baby before you were born." Daniel turned toward him. "What?" Richard nodded. "It was a long time ago. You never told me." His father smiled sadly. "We never told anyone." Daniel stared at him. "Why?" Richard looked at the children playing. "Your mother blamed herself." "And you?" Richard looked down. "I blamed myself for not seeing how much she was hurting." Daniel felt his chest tighten. His father continued, "I promised her I would never let her carry pain by herself again." He paused. "I wish I had kept that promise." Daniel sat there quietly. The silence between them was different now. It wasn't fear. It wasn't avoidance. It was two men, finally speaking honestly. Richard looked at his son. "You still love Maya?" Daniel nodded. "I always will." His father asked the question Daniel had been avoiding. "If she never comes back, who are you going to become?" Daniel didn't answer, because he didn't know. That afternoon, Maya returned to work. She had spent enough time away. The children's ward felt familiar, safe. One of the young patients, 8-year-old Ellie, waved as soon as she saw her. "Nurse Maya." Maya smiled. "Hey, sweetheart." The little girl held out a piece of paper. "I drew this for you." Maya looked at the picture. It was a house, a tree, a little family holding hands. "It's beautiful." Ellie smiled. "My daddy says families don't have to be perfect." Maya felt tears forming. "He says they just have to keep loving each other." Maya hugged the little girl. Sometimes, children understand things adults spend years trying to learn. When her shift ended, Olivia walked beside her to the parking lot. "You look different." Maya laughed softly. "Different how?" "Lighter." Maya looked up at the evening sky. "I finally stopped hiding." Olivia frowned. "What do you mean?" "I spent years pretending I wasn't hurt." She unlocked her car. "I don't want to live that way anymore." Olivia hesitated. "If Daniel had known about the baby." Maya closed her eyes. "I ask myself that every day." "And?" She looked away. "I don't know." It was the most honest answer she could give. Meanwhile, Daniel was back at the house. He walked into the spare bedroom. The empty room no longer looked like a nursery. It looked like a reminder. He picked up the yellow paint sample Maya had chosen. Then he walked into the garage. An old toolbox sat on a shelf. He opened it. Inside was a small wooden birdhouse he had started building years ago. He remembered the conversation. Maya had laughed and said, "When we have kids, you can teach them how to build things." Daniel had never finished it. He carried the birdhouse into the backyard. He sat at the picnic table and began working, cutting, sanding, painting, hour after hour. Not because it would change anything, but because for once, he wanted to finish something they had dreamed about together. A few days later, Rebecca stopped by. She found Daniel hanging the little birdhouse on an old oak tree. "What is that?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Something I should have finished a long time ago." Rebecca looked at her brother. "You've changed." Daniel shook his head. "No." He tightened the last screw. "I'm changing." There was a difference. That evening, Maya came by the house. She hadn't planned to. She had been driving home from work when she noticed Daniel's truck in the driveway. Something made her stop. She walked through the open gate. Daniel was standing beneath the oak tree. He turned around. Neither of them spoke. Then, Maya noticed the birdhouse. She frowned. "You finished it?" Daniel nodded. "I found it in the garage." She walked closer. Her fingers touched the smooth wood. A tiny smile crossed her face. "You never finish projects." Daniel smiled sadly. "I know." They stood together under the tree. The silence felt different. It wasn't full of disappointment. It wasn't full of anger. It was full of things they both wished had happened sooner. Maya looked at the birdhouse. "What made you finish it?" Daniel looked up at the branches. "I kept thinking about someone who never got a chance to come home." A tear rolled down Maya's cheek. She looked away. Daniel didn't try to stop her. He simply stood beside her. After a while, Maya whispered, "I used to imagine bringing our child into this yard." Daniel closed his eyes. "So did I." They stood there until the sun disappeared. Neither noticed that Richard had quietly pulled into the driveway. He stayed inside his car. He looked at the two of them standing beneath the tree. Then he smiled. Not because everything was fixed, because for the first time, they were grieving together, instead of apart. Richard quietly drove away. As darkness settled over the yard, Maya stepped back. "I should go." Daniel nodded. He didn't ask her to stay. She looked at him one last time. "I don't know what happens next." Daniel answered honestly. "Neither do I." She walked toward her car. Just before she opened the door, she turned around. "Daniel?" "Yes?" She looked at the little birdhouse hanging from the tree. "Our child would have liked that." Daniel couldn't speak. He simply nodded. Maya got into her car and drove away. Daniel stood under the oak tree until the headlights disappeared. Then he looked at the birdhouse. A small white envelope was tucked beneath it. He frowned. He walked over and pulled it free. His name was written on the front. The handwriting was unfamiliar. Slowly, he opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. At the top was the logo of a law office. Below it was a short message. "Mr. Carter, your divorce hearing has been scheduled." Daniel looked at the date. It was only 10 days away. He folded the letter carefully. The time for memories was ending. Soon, he would have to face the one question he had spent his whole life avoiding. Was he ready to let Maya go? Or was he finally willing to fight for the family he should have protected from the very beginning? Daniel looked at the letter from the law office for a long time. 10 days. After everything that had happened. The letters. His mother's apology. The truth about the baby. The little birdhouse hanging from the oak tree. They only had 10 days left before a judge would decide what happened to their marriage. He folded the paper and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Then he walked into the backyard. The birdhouse swayed gently in the morning breeze. Daniel looked up at it. For years he had spent his life waiting for the right moment. The right time to speak. The right time to stand up. The right time to change. Now time was something he no longer had. At work the next day, Daniel couldn't focus. His manager called him into the office. "You've been distracted." Daniel nodded. "I know. Is everything all right at home?" He almost answered automatically. "Everything's fine." The same lie he had been telling himself for years. Instead, he shook his head. "No." His manager waited. "My marriage is falling apart." The older man leaned back in his chair. "I've been married 30 years. Daniel looked up. "The biggest mistake I ever made was believing people could read my mind." Daniel listened quietly. "You have 10 days?" He looked surprised. "How did you know?" The man smiled. "You've been staring at that envelope since you walked in." That afternoon, Daniel drove to the cemetery. He had never been there before. Angela had quietly told him where the hospital had arranged a small memorial for families who had lost children before birth. He wasn't sure he belonged there, but something pulled him toward it. A quiet garden stood behind the chapel. Small stones lined a walking path. Flowers had been planted everywhere. Daniel sat alone on a wooden bench. He imagined Maya sitting there months earlier, Alone, grieving, waiting. He closed his eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered. The wind moved softly through the trees. He stayed there until sunset. Across town, Maya was having dinner with Angela. Neither woman said much. Finally, Angela looked at her daughter. "Are you afraid of the hearing?" Maya nodded. "A little." "What are you afraid of?" Maya looked down at her plate. "I'm afraid I'll look at him and remember the man I fell in love with." Angela smiled sadly. "And what if you do?" Maya was quiet. Then she answered, "I'm not sure my heart knows the difference between who he was and who he's trying to become." The next morning, Patricia knocked on Daniel's front door. He opened it. His mother was holding a cardboard box. "What's that?" She looked embarrassed. "I've been cleaning the attic." Daniel moved aside. She walked into the living room and placed the box on the table. Inside were old family photographs, school drawings, birthday cards. At the bottom was a framed picture from Daniel's wedding. Patricia picked it up. "I almost threw this away." Daniel looked shocked. "Why?" She stared at the photograph. "Because every time I looked at it, I remembered the things I should have done differently." Daniel took the picture from her. Maya was smiling. She looked happy. Patricia quietly sat down. "I owe you an apology too." Daniel frowned. "For what?" She looked at her hands. "For teaching you that keeping people happy mattered more than being honest." Daniel didn't know what to say. His mother had spent her whole life believing she was right. Now she was questioning everything. That evening, Maya finished her shift at the hospital. As she walked to the parking lot, she noticed someone standing beside her car. It was Richard, Daniel's father. She looked surprised. "Mr. Carter?" He smiled gently. "Can we talk?" Maya nodded. They sat on a bench outside the hospital. Richard looked older than she remembered. "I came because I never apologized." "You don't owe me anything." He shook his head. "I do." Maya stayed quiet. "I watched my son become the man I was." He looked away. "And I watched you pay the price." A tear rolled down Maya's cheek. Richard reached into his pocket. He handed her a small folded piece of paper. "What is this?" "A letter." She frowned. "From who?" "From Daniel." Maya looked surprised. "He doesn't know I'm giving it to you." She looked at the envelope. "I don't think I should." Richard smiled sadly. "My biggest mistake was waiting too long." He stood up. "I don't want my son to make the same one." Then he quietly walked away. Maya sat alone in her car. The letter rested in her hands. She didn't open it. She started the engine. Then she turned it off again. Finally, she unfolded the paper. There were only a few lines. "Maya, I spent years believing love meant never disappointing people. I finally understand that love sometimes means disappointing everyone else to protect the person standing beside you. I learned that too late. I don't know if you can forgive me, but I will spend the rest of my life becoming the man you deserved, even if I have to do it without you." Maya quietly folded the letter. She didn't cry. She simply sat there, looking through the windshield. The night before the hearing, Daniel returned to the backyard. The little birdhouse was still hanging from the tree. He stood beneath it for a long time. Then he heard footsteps behind him. He turned around. Rebecca was standing there. She looked nervous. "I think you should know something." Daniel frowned. "What?" Rebecca looked at the birdhouse. "I saw Maya today." His heart started racing. "How is she?" Rebecca hesitated. "She was at the courthouse." Daniel's stomach tightened. "And?" Rebecca looked at him with sad eyes. "She was carrying a folder." "What kind of folder?" Rebecca took a slow breath. "The same one she carried the day she filed for divorce." Daniel looked toward the dark sky. 10 days had become one. Tomorrow morning, they would stand in a courtroom together. And for the first time since Maya walked out of the house, Daniel realized that love alone might not be enough to save them. Daniel arrived at the courthouse an hour early. He wasn't sure why. Maybe he hoped time would slow down. Maybe he hoped Maya wouldn't come. Maybe he hoped she would. He sat alone on a wooden bench outside the courtroom. People walked past him carrying folders and briefcases. Some were talking, some were crying, some avoided looking at each other. Daniel wondered which kind of couple they had become. A few minutes later, Richard sat down beside him. Neither man spoke. Finally, Richard looked at his son. "Are you afraid?" Daniel laughed quietly. "I've been afraid my whole life." His father nodded. "I know." Daniel looked at the floor. "I keep thinking about everything I should have done." Richard placed a hand on his shoulder. "You can't change yesterday." Daniel looked up. "But you can decide who walks out of that courtroom." Across the building, Maya sat with Angela. The divorce papers rested in her lap. She hadn't opened them. She didn't need to. She had read them enough times. Angela looked at her daughter. "You don't have to do this if you're not ready." Maya smiled sadly. "I was ready a long time ago." "Are you still?" Maya didn't answer. She looked through the window. Then she saw Daniel walking down the hallway. He looked different, not because of his clothes, not because of the tiredness on his face. He looked like a man carrying the weight of every choice he had ever made. Their eyes met. Neither moved. Angela quietly stood up. So did Richard. Without a word, both parents walked away. For the first time since they had married, Daniel and Maya stood completely alone together. Daniel looked at the folder in her hands. "I never thought we'd end up here." Maya nodded. "Neither did I." He wanted to say 1,000 things. Instead, he asked one simple question. "How are you?" Maya almost smiled. "That's the first time you've asked me that in a long time." Daniel lowered his eyes. "I know." She looked at him carefully. "I'm sad." He nodded. "So am I." A court clerk opened the courtroom doors. "We'll begin in 15 minutes. Daniel looked at Maya. "Can we talk before we go in?" She hesitated. Then she nodded. They walked outside. The morning air was cool. The city around them was busy. People rushed to work. Cars moved through traffic. The world kept going, even when hearts were breaking. They sat on a bench beneath a large oak tree. Neither spoke for a while. Finally, Daniel reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out the ultrasound picture. Maya stared at it. "You kept it." He nodded. "I always will." A tear rolled down her cheek. "I used to wonder what our child would have looked like." Daniel smiled sadly. "I think they would have had your smile." Maya laughed softly through her tears. "And your stubbornness." For the first time in months, they smiled together. It didn't erase the pain, but it reminded them that pain wasn't the only thing they had shared. Daniel looked at her. "I know I don't deserve another chance." Maya stayed quiet. "I'm not asking you to forget." She looked at him. "I'm not asking you to trust me today." The wind moved gently through the branches above them. "I'm asking you one thing." She waited. "Don't let this marriage end because of the man I used to be." Maya looked away. "You were that man for a long time." "I know." She held the folder tightly. "I spent years believing tomorrow would be different." Daniel nodded. "And I spent years believing there would always be another tomorrow." A church bell rang somewhere in the distance. Maya looked at the courthouse. "We should go." Daniel stood. Then he spoke. "If you walk into that courtroom today and still want a divorce," he swallowed, "I won't fight you." She looked surprised. He continued, "Because I finally understand that love isn't holding someone where they don't want to be." Maya looked into his eyes. For the first time, she saw no fear, no pressure, no guilt, just honesty. They walked back toward the courthouse together. Halfway there, Maya stopped. "Daniel," he turned around, "if I asked you to leave this city." His heart started racing. "And start over somewhere no one knew us." She paused. "Would you?" He didn't hesitate. "Yes." She looked at him carefully. "If I asked you to miss holidays with your family?" "Yes." "If I asked you to put our marriage first every single day?" "Yes." Maya closed her eyes. "That's what scares me." Daniel frowned. "What does?" "The fact that I finally believe you." They entered the courthouse. The courtroom doors were open. The judge was already seated. Their attorneys waited at separate tables. Daniel looked at Maya. She looked at the divorce papers in her hands. Slowly, she walked toward the front. Everyone in the room became quiet. She reached the table. Then she stopped. Her fingers tightened around the folder. She looked at Daniel, then at Angela, then at Patricia, who had quietly come to watch. Tears filled her eyes. Slowly, she placed the folder on the table, but she didn't sit down. Instead, she turned toward the judge. "Your Honor." Oh, her voice shook. "I'd like to ask for more time." The entire courtroom fell silent. Daniel couldn't breathe. The judge adjusted his glasses. "Mrs. Carter, are you requesting a postponement?" Maya nodded. "Yes." The judge looked at Daniel. "And you, Mr. Carter?" Daniel looked at the woman he loved, the woman he had nearly lost, the woman who had given him one final chance. His voice was steady. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge signed a document. "This hearing is postponed for 90 days. The sound of the pen against the paper echoed through the courtroom. 90 days, not a reunion, not a miracle. Just time. Time to prove that change was real. Time to discover whether broken trust could be rebuilt. As everyone slowly stood, Maya looked at Daniel. "This isn't a promise." He nodded. "I know. It isn't forgiveness." "I know." She held his gaze. "It's just a chance." Daniel smiled through tears. For a man who had spent his whole life wasting chances, it was more than he ever expected to receive. The ride home was quiet. Daniel drove. Maya sat in the passenger seat, not because they had decided to get back together, not because everything was suddenly fixed, Her car was still parked at Angela's house, and when Daniel stopped at a red light, Maya looked out the window instead of at him. The judge had given them 90 days. 90 days to decide whether their marriage could survive. But both of them understood the truth. Time alone changes nothing. People do. When they reached Angela's house, Daniel parked at the curb. Neither of them moved. Finally, Maya broke the silence. "I want us to be clear about something." Daniel nodded. "I'm not coming home." "I know. I'm not wearing my wedding ring again." "I understand. And I'm not pretending the last few years didn't happen." Daniel looked at her. "You don't have to." She studied his face. There was no argument, no pleading, no promise that he would somehow make everything disappear. For the first time, she wondered if he had finally learned to listen. "I have conditions," Maya said. Daniel waited. "I think we've had enough promises." He nodded. "What do you need from me?" Maya looked down at her hands. "I need honesty." "You'll have it." "I need you to stop hiding behind silence." He nodded again. "And I need to know that if your family hurts this marriage again." She looked directly into his eyes. "You won't ask me to carry it alone?" Daniel answered quietly. "You won't." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she opened the car door. "I hope that's true." She stepped out and walked toward the house. Daniel didn't follow her. He waited until she was safely inside. Then he drove home. The first week passed without grand gestures. Daniel didn't send flowers. He didn't leave gifts at Angela's house. He didn't write long letters. Instead, he did something he had never done before. He started seeing a counselor. The first session was uncomfortable. The counselor, Dr. Harris, asked simple questions. "What are you afraid of?" Daniel laughed. "Conflict." "Why?" He thought about his childhood, his parents, the quiet dinners, the arguments that ended only because someone stopped talking. "I thought peace meant nobody being upset." Dr. Harris nodded. "And what do you think now?" Daniel looked out the window. "I think peace built on silence isn't peace at all." Meanwhile, Maya was trying to rebuild her own life. She worked. She spent time with her mother. She visited the little memorial garden once a week. One afternoon, Olivia joined her. "Do you think you'll go back to Daniel?" Maya smiled sadly. "I don't know." Olivia sat beside her. "Do you want to?" Maya watched the flowers move in the breeze. "I want to trust him." She paused. But wanting something and believing it are different. The second week, Patricia called Daniel. "I was thinking." He waited. "Maybe we could have Sunday dinner." Daniel knew what she meant. The old tradition, the old expectations, the old patterns. He took a slow breath. "I can't." His mother was quiet. "Because of Maya?" Daniel answered honestly. "Because I'm trying to become a better husband." Patricia didn't speak for several seconds. Then she quietly said, "I'm trying to become a better mother." Daniel smiled. "I know." A few days later, Maya came to the house to collect the last of her books. Daniel was in the backyard. He was repairing the old fence. She stood there watching him. "You hate fixing things." He smiled. "I know." She noticed a toolbox sitting open nearby. Beside it was a folded piece of paper. She picked it up. It was a list. Things I avoided for too long. At the top was one word: apologizing. Below it were others: speaking honestly, setting boundaries, listening, asking for help. Maya looked at him. "You made this?" Daniel nodded. "My counselor told me to." She handed the paper back. "How's that going?" He smiled faintly. "It's harder than ignoring everything." She almost laughed. "That, I believe." They sat beneath the oak tree. The little birdhouse still hung from the branch. Neither of them mentioned it. Some memories didn't need words. Daniel looked at Maya. "Can I ask you something?" She nodded. "What are you doing during these 90 days? She thought about the question. "I'm trying to figure out who I am when I'm not waiting for someone else to choose me." Daniel lowered his eyes. She immediately regretted saying it, but he simply nodded. "You should." As the sun began to set, Maya stood. "I have to go." Daniel walked her to her car. She opened the door. Then she stopped. "My mother invited your parents over for dinner next week." Daniel looked surprised. "She did?" Maya nodded. "She thinks everyone should talk." Daniel frowned. "And what do you think?" Maya looked toward the road. "I think some conversations come years late." She looked back at him. But late is better than never. She got into her car and drove away. The following Friday evening, Angela set the dining table for 6 people. She looked at the empty chairs, one for herself, one for Maya, one for Daniel, one for Patricia, one for Richard, one for Rebecca. No lawyers, no judges, no family audience. Just 6 people carrying years of hurt. At exactly 7 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Angela opened the door. Richard was standing there. Behind him, was Patricia. And behind Patricia, Angela's smile slowly disappeared. Daniel looked through the doorway and froze. Maya stepped into the hall. Her eyes widened. Standing beside Patricia was a woman neither of them had expected to see, an elderly woman with silver hair and a wooden cane. Patricia looked at her son. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Daniel. She swallowed hard. I'd like you to meet the mother I spent my whole life trying to please. No one spoke. The elderly woman stood quietly in the doorway. She was small. Her silver hair was neatly tied back. One hand rested on a wooden cane. The other held a small handbag. Patricia looked more nervous than Daniel had ever seen her. Mama. Her voice was soft. This is Daniel. The older woman smiled politely. I know who he is. Then her eyes moved to Maya. And you must be his wife. Maya hesitated. Then she answered honestly. I don't know what I am anymore. The old woman nodded, as if she understood the answer better than anyone else in the room. Everyone sat down for dinner. The table was quiet. Angela served the food. Richard poured water into the glasses. Rebecca looked from one face to another. Daniel noticed something strange. His mother barely spoke. The woman who had controlled every family gathering for years sat silently, avoiding her own mother's eyes. Finally, Angela broke the silence. I'm glad everyone came. The older woman smiled. So am I. She looked around the table. Families spend too much time staying apart. Maya lowered her eyes. Some people spend too much time feeling alone while sitting together. Halfway through dinner, the elderly woman placed her fork down. She looked at Patricia. You've been angry with me. Patricia looked shocked. What? You stopped visiting. The room became still. Patricia forced a smile. I've just been busy. The old woman slowly shook her head. No. Her voice was calm. You're afraid of me. Daniel stared at his mother. She didn't answer. For the first time in his life, he saw fear in her eyes. Real fear. I don't understand, Rebecca whispered. The elderly woman looked at her granddaughter. When your mother was a little girl. She paused. She wanted to become a painter. Patricia quickly interrupted. Mama, but the old woman continued. She was very good. Daniel looked at his mother. He had never heard this story. She wanted to go to art school. Patricia looked down. The old woman sighed. But I told her that dreams don't feed families. The room remained silent. I told her that good daughters obey their parents. Patricia's eyes filled with tears. I told her that feelings only make life harder. Daniel felt something inside him break. Those words sounded familiar. Too familiar. I was hard on her, the old woman admitted. I thought I was making her strong. Patricia quietly wiped her eyes. I spent my whole life trying to make you proud. Her mother looked surprised. You already were. Patricia laughed through her tears. You never said that. The old woman had no answer. Daniel looked at Maya. She was watching everything quietly. She wasn't angry. She wasn't judging. She was simply seeing a part of the story she had never known. Patricia looked at her son. When I pushed you to keep the family together. Her voice shook. I thought I was protecting you from disappointment. Daniel stayed quiet. I never realized I was teaching you to ignore your own heart. Richard reached across the table and gently took his wife's hand. For once, neither of them pulled away. The dinner ended quietly. The elderly woman asked if she could speak to Maya alone. The two walked into the garden. The evening air was cool. Flowers moved gently in the breeze. The old woman looked at Maya. I'm sorry. Maya looked surprised. You don't owe me an apology. The older woman smiled sadly. I owe one to every woman who was taught to stay quiet. Maya felt tears in her eyes. The old woman touched her hand. My daughter became the woman I raised her to be. She looked toward the house. And my grandson became the man she raised him to be. Maya listened. But you... The old woman smiled. You were brave enough to leave. Inside the house, Daniel was helping Angela clear the table. Angela looked at him. Do you know what I think? He shook his head. I think this family has been passing pain from one generation to the next. Daniel nodded. And I think someone finally decided to stop carrying it. He knew she wasn't talking about him. She was talking about Maya. Before everyone left, Patricia walked over to Maya. She held out a small box. What is this? Maya asked. Patricia smiled sadly. It was supposed to belong to my daughter one day. Maya looked confused. I never had one. She opened the box. Inside was a delicate silver necklace. A tiny heart hung from the chain. Patricia's voice trembled. I wanted to give this to you when you had your first child. Maya looked at the necklace, then at Patricia. The older woman was crying again. I know I don't have the right to ask anything from you. Maya closed the box gently. But I hope one day you'll remember that I finally learned how to love you. Maya stepped forward and hugged her. It wasn't the hug of a daughter. It wasn't forgiveness. It was simply two wounded people choosing not to hate each other. When everyone had gone home, Daniel and Maya stood on the front porch. The night was quiet. Daniel looked at her. I understand something now. She waited. My mother spent her life trying to become the daughter her mother wanted. He looked toward the empty street. And I spent my life trying to become the son my mother wanted. Maya nodded. And what about now? Daniel looked into her eyes. Now I'm trying to become the man I want to be. A small smile touched Maya's face. It disappeared almost immediately. She looked at the ground. The hearing was postponed. I know. The 90 days are almost half gone. Daniel nodded. I know. She looked at him carefully. I still don't know what I'm going to do. Daniel didn't ask for an answer. He simply said, I'll respect whatever you decide. Maya walked toward her car. Then she stopped. She looked back at him. My therapist asked me a question today. Daniel waited. She asked me what I would do if I met you for the first time today. His heart started racing. And? Maya smiled sadly. I told her, May. She paused. I'd fall in love with you. Hope filled Daniel's eyes. Then she finished. But I don't know if I'd trust you. She got into her car. Daniel stood there watching the headlights disappear into the darkness. He looked up at the stars. For the first time he understood that love and trust were two different promises. One could survive heartbreak. The other had to be rebuilt. He turned toward the house. A folded note was tucked between the front door and the frame. He picked it up. There was no name on the outside. He opened it. Inside was a short message. Mr. Carter, this is a reminder that your 90-day reconciliation period ends in 48 hours. Daniel looked at the paper, then toward the empty road. In 2 days, Maya would make the final choice. And this time, he knew that no one else could make it for her. For the first time in his life, Daniel stopped running from the truth. His mother faced her past. His family finally admitted the pain they had passed from one generation to the next. And Maya confessed something she never thought she would say again. She could still fall in love with him. But love is not the same as trust. And in just 48 hours, Maya will have to make the decision that changes both of their lives forever. Will she walk away and close this chapter for good? Or will Daniel finally prove that some people really can change? If this story has touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, and share your thoughts in the comments. If you were Maya, would you give Daniel one last chance? Or would you let the past stay in the past? Because the final chapter is coming. And not every love story ends the way people expect.